Most of us lie awake every night asking the same haunting question. Why does sleep feel so impossible? Why does rest feel so restless? Why do we close our eyes and still feel wide awake inside? We put the phone down. We dim the lights. We do everything right. And somehow our minds still spin like hamster wheels, powered by pure stress, that awkward thing from 3 weeks ago, tomorrow's presentation, whether you lock the front door, why your neighbor's dog seems personally bothered by your existence. But 2,000 years ago, some people faced the same mental chaos, the same spinning thoughts, the same sleepless nights, and instead of surrendering to the chaos, they discovered something that could change everything. They learned to turn mental storms into something resembling peace. This isn't another sleep hack. This isn't another quick fix. This is about building unshakable inner quiet. So if you've ever felt like your mind won't let you rest, even when your body is exhausted, this is for you. Not because I have all the answers, but because what I'm about to share has been tested by centuries of restless minds. And it works. If that resonates with you, even just a little, hit that subscribe button. But only if you genuinely enjoy what we do here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing this community we've built, spanning time zones and continents. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. You're in the right place. Let's ease into tonight's journey toward the peace you've been searching for. You're about to meet the Stoics, not the emotionally repressed people your high school guidance counselor worried about, but a group of ancient philosophers who developed what might be the most practical stress management system ever created. These weren't ivory tower academics debating how many angels could dance on a pinhead. These were real people dealing with real problems. Marcus Aurelius juggling an empire while battling his own worried thoughts. Seneca navigating the treacherous politics of Nero's court. And Epictetus building a philosophy of freedom while literally enslaved. The Stoic school emerged in ancient Athens around 300 BCE, founded by a guy named Zeno of Citium after he lost everything in a shipwreck. Talk about turning lemons into lemonade, or in this case, turning maritime disaster into philosophical gold. The name Stoic comes from the Stoipoikil, the painted porch where Zeno taught his students. Historians still argue whether the colorful murals on that porch influenced Stoic thinking about perception and reality. But what we know for sure is that this outdoor classroom became the birthplace of ideas that would comfort everyone, from Roman emperors to modern CEOs, having 3 a.m. worry spirals. Here's what makes Stoicism different from other philosophical approaches. It's obsessively practical. While other schools debated abstract concepts, Stoics asked one simple question: how do we live well in a world that seems designed to stress us out? They developed tools, actual mental techniques you can use tonight, tomorrow morning, and every day after that. Think of it as cognitive behavioral therapy, but with togas and a lot more acceptance of life's fundamental weirdness. The core insight that drives everything else is beautifully simple. Most of our suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from our judgments about what happens to us. Your phone dies during an important call. That's just a fact. Your spiral into a worst-case scenario, thinking about how this ruins everything and proves you're fundamentally incompetent, that's optional. The Stoics figured out how to make that distinction automatic. turning what feels like emotional chaos into something manageable. But here's the quirky part that most people miss. The Stoics weren't trying to eliminate emotions. They were trying to eliminate destructive emotions while cultivating constructive ones. They wanted to feel joy, love, and appropriate concern. They just didn't want to be hijacked by intense anger, deep discouragement, or the kind of restless concern that keeps you refreshing your email at 2 a.m. It's emotional intelligence with a philosophical backbone. What makes this especially relevant for our current moment is how perfectly Stoic principles address modern stress triggers. Social media comparison. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about not being disturbed by others' opinions. Career uncertainty. Seneca built and lost multiple fortunes while maintaining his philosophical equilibrium. Information overload. Epictetus taught techniques for filtering what deserves your attention and what doesn't. You're probably wondering if this actually works, or if it's just ancient wishful thinking dressed up in fancy language. Fair question. The truth is, Stoicism has been quietly influencing psychology, therapy, and self-help for decades. Cognitive behavioral therapy borrows heavily from Stoic techniques. Modern resilience training uses Stoic exercises. Even mindfulness meditation shares DNA with Stoic practices, though the Stoics were doing it 1500 years before Buddhism reached the West. Tonight, we're going to walk through these ideas slowly, letting them settle into your mind like sediment in still water. We'll explore how a slave became one of history's greatest teachers of freedom, how an emperor used philosophy to manage overwhelming responsibility, and how a wealthy advisor learned to find peace regardless of external circumstances. More importantly, we'll discover how their insights can transform your relationship with the very things that keep you awake at night. The beautiful thing about Stoicism is that it meets you where you are. Stressed about work? There's a Stoic approach for that. Overwhelmed by world events? The Stoics lived through plagues, wars, and political upheaval that make our current chaos look manageable. Struggling with relationships? They had thoughts about that too. Worried about passing, meaning, and whether any of this matters? Well, that's where they really shine. So settle in deeper, let your breathing slow down, and prepare to meet some of the most practical wisdom teachers in human history. They're about to show you how to sleep better tonight and worry less tomorrow. You're lying there, thinking about everything you can't control. Your boss's mood tomorrow, whether that text you sent came across wrong, if your investment portfolio will survive whatever economic weirdness is brewing. And suddenly you remember something Epictetus figured out 2,000 years ago while chained to a Roman master. He divided the entire universe into exactly 2 categories, and this simple distinction became the foundation of everything that follows. Picture Epictetus in his small room, probably by candlelight, working out this revolutionary idea. On one side, he placed everything you can control. On the other side, everything you can't. That's it. 2 buckets. The whole cosmos sorted into this beautifully simple framework that cuts through stress like a hot knife through butter. The genius isn't in the complexity. It's in the radical simplicity. What can you actually control? Your thoughts, your judgments, your responses, your actions, your values, and your effort. That's pretty much the complete list. Notice how short it is? Everything else, and I mean everything else, falls into the second category. Other people's opinions, the weather, the stock market, whether your flight gets delayed, if you get that promotion, how long you live, whether people like your social media posts, and yes, even whether this philosophy actually helps you sleep better tonight. Here's where it gets interesting. Most people spend roughly 90% of their mental energy worrying about things in the second category, while neglecting the first category almost entirely. You'll lie awake for hours, rehearsing conversations with people who might never say what you're preparing for, while barely spending 5 minutes thinking about how you want to respond to whatever actually happens. It's like obsessing over the weather while ignoring whether you've packed an umbrella. The historical context makes this even more powerful. Epictetus developed this framework while literally enslaved, owned by Epaphroditus, a freedman who served in Nero's court. Historians still argue whether Epaphroditus was the same person who later helped Nero commit unalive. But what's certain is that Epictetus had zero control over his external circumstances. He couldn't choose where to live, what to eat, or how to spend his days. Yet he found a way to be internally free while externally constrained. If that's not relevant to feeling trapped by modern life, I don't know what is. But here's the quirky detail that most philosophy books skip. Epictetus was apparently lame in one leg, possibly from an injury sustained during his enslavement. Some sources suggest his master broke his leg deliberately, while others point to an accident or illness. Either way, he understood physical limitation intimately. When he talked about accepting what you can't control, he wasn't speaking from a place of privilege. He was speaking from lived experience of powerlessness. The practical application starts with catching yourself in the act of mental time travel. You're worrying about tomorrow's meeting, replaying yesterday's awkward moment, or catastrophizing about next month's financial situation. Stop. Ask yourself, is this something I can actually control right now? If the answer is no, you're literally wasting mental energy on something that exists only in your imagination. If the answer is yes, then do something about it or plan when you will. This isn't about becoming passive or fatalistic. It's about becoming strategically focused. When you stop burning mental calories on uncontrollables, you suddenly have enormous energy available for the things you can actually influence. It's like finally closing all those browser tabs that have been slowing down your computer for months. The modern twist is that our technology actively works against this principle. Your phone is designed to make you feel like you can and should control everything. Every notification suggests something that demands your immediate attention and response. Social media creates the illusion that you can control how others perceive you if you just craft the perfect post. News apps flood you with global events that trigger your concern but offer no meaningful way to respond. We're swimming in a sea of artificial controllables that are actually completely outside our influence. Here's where the Stoic approach gets almost magical. When you truly accept what you can't control, you stop fighting reality and start working with it. Instead of raging against traffic, you use the time to listen to something interesting. Instead of stressing about your coworker's bad mood, you focus on maintaining your own professional demeanor. Instead of doom scrolling about political events, you channel that concern into local action where your voice actually matters. The dichotomy of control also transforms how you handle failure and success. When things go well, you can enjoy the outcome without taking credit for factors beyond your influence. When things go poorly, you can learn from your part without taking responsibility for everything outside your control. It's like having a built-in emotional thermostat that keeps you steady regardless of external temperature. But let's be honest, this is easier said than done. Your brain has been practicing the opposite approach for years, maybe decades. It's going to keep trying to solve unsolvable problems and control uncontrollable outcomes. That's normal. The Stoic approach isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Every time you catch yourself spinning about something outside your control and redirect that energy towards something within your influence, you're building the mental muscle that eventually makes this automatic. Tonight, as your mind starts to wander toward tomorrow's uncertainties or yesterday's regrets, gently remind yourself of Epictetus sitting in his small room, sorting the entire universe into two simple categories. Ask yourself which category your current worry belongs to, and if it's in the uncontrollable bucket, let it drift away like a cloud passing overhead. Save your energy for what actually matters and what you can actually do something about. You reach for your phone again, even though you checked it 30 seconds ago. And there's that familiar flutter of stress as notifications cascade down the screen like digital confetti, celebrating your inability to disconnect. Welcome to the modern application of that dichotomy of control we just explored, where ancient wisdom meets the attention economy that's literally designed to make you feel like everything requires your immediate response. Let's start with the obvious. Your phone buzzing doesn't actually require anything from you. That notification sound is just air molecules vibrating in a particular pattern. The red badge on your email app is just pixels arranged to trigger urgency. The algorithmic feed showing you increasingly outrageous content is just code designed to keep your eyeballs engaged. None of this is actually demanding your attention. You're choosing to give it, often unconsciously, because the technology exploits psychological vulnerabilities that evolved long before smartphones existed. Here's where Epictetus would have a field day with our current predicament. Every notification represents a choice point. Will you respond to external stimuli, or will you maintain internal direction? The Stoics understood that freedom isn't about having unlimited options. It's about consciously choosing your responses rather than being unconsciously reactive. Your phone offers the illusion of infinite choice while actually training you to be increasingly reactive to external triggers. The historical parallel is fascinating. In ancient Rome, the Forum was the center of social, political, and commercial life. Imagine Twitter, LinkedIn, and Amazon all happening in one chaotic public square. Citizens would gather to hear news, conduct business, engage in political debate, and show off their status through clothing and entourage. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about the exhausting nature of public life and the constant pressure to respond to every social and political development. Sound familiar? But here's the quirky detail that most people miss. Romans had a concept called otium, leisure time specifically dedicated to intellectual and spiritual development, as opposed to negotium, which was business and public obligations. The wealthy would retreat to their villas, not just for relaxation, but for focused study, reflection, and philosophical practice. They understood that constant engagement with public affairs was spiritually depleting and required intentional counterbalancing. Modern digital life has eliminated otium almost entirely. Your leisure time is still filled with negotiation, work emails, social obligations, news consumption, and the endless scroll of other people's curated lives. Even your entertainment is increasingly interactive, demanding responses, likes, shares, and comments. You're never truly off duty from the attention economy. The Stoic approach to this digital chaos starts with recognizing what you actually control in your relationship with technology. You can't control the algorithm that decides what appears in your feed, but you can control whether you open the app. You can't control whether people respond to your messages immediately, but you can control how often you check for responses. You can't control what news events happen around the world, but you can control how much time you spend consuming news versus taking meaningful action. Here's a practical exercise that would make Epictetus proud. Before reaching for your phone, pause and ask yourself what you're hoping to control by checking it. Are you trying to control other people's responses to your messages? Are you trying to control your sense of being informed about events you can't influence? Are you trying to control your social status by monitoring likes and comments? Most of the time, you'll discover you're unconsciously trying to control things that fall squarely in the not up to you category. The notification settings on your devices represent one of the most direct applications of Stoic principles available to modern people. Every notification you allow is essentially voting for external control over your attention. Every notification you disable is a vote for internal direction of your focus. The Stoics would see this as a fundamental choice about who runs your mind, you or the attention merchants. Social media algorithms present an especially interesting challenge because they're designed to show you content that provokes strong emotional responses. The algorithm doesn't care whether those emotions are positive or negative. It just wants engagement. Anger, outrage, envy, and fear all drive clicks just as effectively as joy, inspiration, and love. Historians still argue whether the Roman practice of public spectacles served a similar function, providing emotional outlets that kept citizens engaged with the system while distracting from deeper political participation. The Stoic response isn't to become a digital hermit, it's to become intentional about your engagement. Instead of passively consuming whatever the algorithm serves up, you actively choose what deserves your attention based on your values and goals. Instead of reflexively responding to every social media post that triggers you, you pause and consider whether your response will actually contribute something valuable or just feed the outrage machine. Here's where it gets really practical. You can apply the dichotomy of control to every aspect of your digital life. Can you control whether your post gets likes? Number. Can you control whether you post something authentic and valuable? Yes. Can you control whether people agree with your political opinions online? Number. Can you control whether you engage in political discussions constructively rather than reactively? Yes. Can you control whether you get that job you applied for online? Number. Can you control the quality of your application and follow-up? Yes. The evening hours are especially important for digital stoicism. Your brain needs time to process the day's experiences and prepare for restorative sleep, but endless scrolling keeps it in a state of artificial stimulation. The blue light is just the beginning. The real problem is the psychological activation that comes from constantly consuming other people's thoughts, problems, and curated highlight reels. Tonight, as you feel the familiar urge to check just one more thing before sleep, remember that ancient insight about control. Your phone will still be there tomorrow, but this moment of peace, this opportunity to let your mind settle into stillness, is happening right now. The notifications can wait. The news will still be there in the morning. Other people's digital lives will continue without your constant observation. The most radical act in our hyper-connected age might be the simple choice to disconnect, to reclaim your attention as your own, and to remember that the most important conversations happen not in comment sections, but in the quiet space between your thoughts. You're scrolling through Instagram at 11 p.m., and there it is again, that familiar knot in your stomach as you watch someone's perfectly curated vacation photos, their promotion announcement, their seemingly effortless relationship milestones. Your rational brain knows it's all highlight reels and strategic editing, but your emotional brain is already writing the story about how everyone else has figured out life while you're lying here in yesterday's pajamas, wondering if you remembered to pay the electric bill. Marcus Aurelius would recognize this feeling immediately, though his version involved marble statues and public ceremonies instead of filtered selfies. Picture the Roman emperor sitting in his tent during the Germanic campaigns, writing in his personal journal about the exhausting performance of imperial life. Every public appearance was theater, every gesture analyzed for political meaning, every decision scrutinized by senators, citizens, and historians. He wrote extensively about the burden of reputation and the futility of seeking approval from people whose opinions shift like weather patterns. How much trouble he avoids, who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does, he noted, probably after another day of managing the ancient equivalent of going viral for all the wrong reasons. The historical context makes this even more relevant. Roman society was intensely status conscious, with complex hierarchies displayed through clothing, housing, public behavior, and social connections. Citizens would spend enormous resources on public games, festivals, and monuments, not for personal enjoyment, but to maintain their reputation and social standing. The pressure to keep up appearances was so intense that many wealthy Romans bankrupted themselves funding public spectacles. Sound like anyone you know dropping serious money on lifestyle purchases for the gram? But here's the quirky detail that most history books gloss over. Romans actually invented the concept of persona, literally meaning mask, to describe the different social roles people performed in public versus their private selves. They understood that public identity was essentially theatrical, a performance designed for specific audiences and purposes. What's fascinating is that they saw this as normal and necessary, not as some kind of authentic self-betrayal. They just didn't confuse the mask with the person wearing it. Marcus Aurelius took this understanding and ran with it in a direction that speaks directly to our social media stress. He realized that other people's opinions of you exist entirely in their minds, not in reality. When someone judges you based on your Instagram posts, that judgment lives in their head, shaped by their own insecurities, experiences, and projections. It literally has nothing to do with who you actually are. You can't control what story they tell themselves about your life, but you can control whether you base your self-worth on their internal narrative. The comparison trap that social media amplifies so effectively was already well understood by ancient Stoics. Seneca wrote about the futility of measuring your life against others, pointing out that you're comparing your internal experience, complete with all its doubts, fears, and mundane moments, to other people's external presentations. It's like comparing your rough draft to their published book, your behind-the-scenes chaos to their highlight reel, your 3 a.m. stress to their IRC, carefully crafted morning routine posts. Here's where the Stoic approach gets really practical. Instead of trying to curate a perfect online presence, focus on living according to your actual values. Instead of crafting posts to impress people whose opinions don't actually matter to your daily happiness, share things that reflect who you genuinely are. Instead of scrolling through other people's achievements and feeling inadequate, use that energy to work on your own goals. The difference between performing for external validation and expressing authentic values is the difference between exhaustion and fulfillment. The algorithm makes this even more challenging because it's specifically designed to show you content that triggers emotional responses, including envy, inadequacy, and social comparison. The platform profits from your engagement, not your well-being. Every minute you spend feeling bad about your life while scrolling through other people's curated highlights is a menu the attention economy is successfully extracting value from your psychological discomfort. Marcus Aurelius had a particularly elegant solution to reputation stress. He would imagine how insignificant current social dramas would seem from the perspective of cosmic time. In 100 years, no one will remember your awkward post, your professional setback, or that time you said something stupid in a meeting. Historians still argue whether this cosmic perspective was influenced by Stoic physics or personal coping mechanisms, but the practical effect is the same. It shrinks current social anxieties down to their actual size. The validation addiction that social media creates is essentially an outsourcing of self-worth to external metrics. Likes, comments, shares, and followers become a kind of social credit score that you check compulsively, looking for evidence of your value as a human being. But here's what the Stoics understood. External validation is fundamentally unreliable because it depends on factors completely outside your control. Other people's moods, the algorithm's whims, timing, trends, and the general chaos of human psychology. Real confidence, the kind that lets you sleep peacefully regardless of your social media metrics, comes from internal validation based on whether you're living according to your values. Did you treat people kindly today? Did you work on something meaningful? Did you respond to challenges with courage rather than reactivity? Did you contribute something positive to the world, even in a small way? These are questions you can actually answer, and the answers don't depend on anyone else's approval. The evening scroll is particularly toxic because it fills your mind with other people's lives just when you should be processing your own day. Instead of reflecting on your experiences, learning from your mistakes, and appreciating your progress, you're consuming a steady stream of external comparison material. It's like trying to fall asleep while someone reads you a list of everything you don't have and haven't accomplished. Tonight, when you feel the urge to check how your latest post is performing or to see what everyone else is up to, remember Marcus Aurelius, writing by candlelight in his military tent, reminding himself that other people's opinions are just thoughts in their heads, no more substantial than clouds passing overhead. Your worth isn't determined by external metrics. It's determined by how well you're living, according to your own values, and treating the people in your actual life. The most liberating realization is that most people are too busy worrying about their own image to spend much time judging yours. Everyone else is also lying awake, wondering if they said the right thing, posted the right photo, or made the right impression. We're all just humans stumbling through life, trying to figure it out as we go, occasionally posting evidence that we exist and hoping someone notices we're doing okay. You're staring at your laptop screen at 10:47 p.m., refreshing your email for the third time in 5 minutes, even though you know nothing work-related is going to arrive that can't wait until tomorrow. But there's that nagging voice whispering about the project deadline, the client meeting, whether your boss noticed you left 15 minutes early last Tuesday, and if that casual comment from your coworker meant something deeper about your job security. Welcome to the modern career stress spiral, where Seneca's hard-won wisdom about work, ambition, and professional resilience becomes your unexpected guide through the maze of contemporary workplace stress. Lucius Annaeus Seneca lived through one of history's most dramatic examples of career volatility. He went from wealthy philosopher to political exile, then back to become advisor to the most powerful man in the world, only to eventually face forced unalive when his student turned emperor decided he was a threat. If anyone understood the precarious nature of professional life and the stress that comes with depending on other people's approval for your livelihood, it was this guy. His letters to his friend Lucilius read like a masterclass in maintaining psychological equilibrium while navigating workplace politics that literally involved life and passing consequences. The historical context makes Seneca's career advice especially relevant to our current moment. Roman professional life was intensely relationship dependent, with patronage networks determining access to opportunities, wealth, and social status. Your career could be destroyed overnight by political shifts, personal rivalries, or simply backing the wrong faction in imperial succession disputes. There was no LinkedIn, no professional development courses, and definitely no HR department to file complaints with. Success depended on managing complex relationships while maintaining personal integrity, a balancing act that required constant vigilance and philosophical grounding. Here's the quirky detail that most business books miss. Seneca was incredibly wealthy, possibly one of the richest men in Rome, but he also understood that wealth could disappear instantly through political upheaval, natural disasters, or economic collapse. He practiced what he called poverty training, deliberately living simply for periods of time to remind himself that happiness didn't depend on external circumstances. Imagine a modern CEO voluntarily eating ramen and taking public transportation for a month just to stay psychologically prepared for potential financial setbacks. The modern workplace creates stress through many of the same mechanisms that troubled ancient Romans: unclear expectations, shifting power dynamics, competition for limited resources, and the constant need to prove your value to people whose priorities change unpredictably. Add in the gig economy, remote work isolation, and the pressure to constantly upskill in a rapidly changing technological landscape, and you've got a recipe for the kind of career stress that keeps people awake scrolling job boards at midnight. Seneca's approach to professional stress starts with a fundamental reframe. Your job is not your identity. Your worth is not determined by your productivity, and your security comes from internal resources rather than external circumstances. This doesn't mean being lazy or uncommitted. It means doing excellent work from a place of personal integrity rather than desperate need for approval. When your self-worth isn't hostage to your boss's mood or your company's quarterly results, you can actually perform better because you're not operating from a place of fear. The Stoic approach to workplace politics is particularly elegant. Instead of trying to control how others perceive you or manipulate outcomes through strategic relationship management, you focus on being consistently reliable, honest, and competent. You can't control whether you get the promotion, but you can control whether you deserve it. You can't control your coworkers' passive-aggressive behavior, but you can control your professional response to it. You can't control market conditions that affect your industry, but you can control how well you adapt to changing circumstances. Historians still argue whether Seneca's wealth made his philosophical advice about career detachment easier to follow, but his letters reveal genuine stress about professional setbacks, political pressures, and the challenge of maintaining ethical standards in a corrupt system. He wasn't writing from a place of privilege that insulated him from workplace stress. He was writing from the eye of the storm, trying to maintain philosophical equilibrium while managing enormous professional responsibilities. The hustle culture that dominates modern career advice would have baffled ancient Stoics. The idea that you should sacrifice your health, relationships, and peace of mind for professional advancement contradicts everything they understood about human flourishing. Seneca worked incredibly hard and achieved remarkable success, but he also maintained perspective about what work was for, supporting a meaningful life, not replacing it. He understood that professional achievement without personal wisdom was just elaborate slavery to external validation. Here's where Stoic career philosophy gets really practical. It transforms how you handle professional setbacks. When you don't get the job you wanted, instead of spiraling into self-doubt or resentment, you can focus on what the experience taught you and how to improve your approach. When your project gets canceled due to budget cuts, instead of taking it personally, you can appreciate the skills you developed and the relationships you built. When your industry gets disrupted by technology, instead of panicking about obsolescence, you can focus on adapting and finding new ways to contribute value. The evening work stress that keeps so many people awake usually centers on things completely outside their control. What their boss thinks, whether the company will have layoffs, if their presentation will be well received, whether that email they sent was interpreted correctly. Seneca would recognize this as a fundamental category error. You're spending mental energy on outcomes you can't influence, while neglecting the preparation, attitude, and effort you can control. The modern tendency to check work email after hours would have particularly amused Seneca, who understood that constant availability doesn't actually improve performance. It just creates the illusion of control while destroying the mental space needed for creativity, reflection, and genuine problem solving. He practiced what we might now call deep work, setting aside uninterrupted time for thinking, writing, and strategic planning, rather than constantly reacting to immediate demands. Tonight, as your mind drifts toward tomorrow's work challenges or next week's deadlines, remember Seneca writing his letters by oil lamp, managing the complexities of Roman politics while maintaining philosophical perspective. Your career is important, but it's not everything. Your professional identity is just one aspect of who you are, not the totality of your worth. The work will still be there tomorrow, but this moment of peace, this opportunity to let your mind rest from the endless cycle of professional worry is happening right now. The most successful people aren't those who never experience career setbacks. They're those who maintain their equilibrium through inevitable ups and downs, who do excellent work without being enslaved by outcomes, and who remember that professional life is meant to support human flourishing, not replace it. You're lying there in the dark, and suddenly your mind decides to play its favorite late-night game. What if everything goes wrong? What if you lose your job? What if your relationship falls apart? What if that weird pain in your side is something serious? What if your savings aren't enough for retirement? What if, what if, what if? Until you're wide awake, heart racing, imagining worst-case scenarios about futures that exist only in your mind. This is where the Stoics offer you one of their most counterintuitive tools. Instead of fighting these thoughts, they want you to lean into them deliberately, systematically, and with a purpose that transforms stress into appreciation. Welcome to negative visualization, or as the Stoics called it, premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Before you start thinking, this sounds like a recipe for melancholy, stick with me. This isn't about becoming pessimistic or manifesting bad outcomes. It's about building psychological resilience by mentally rehearsing how you would handle difficult situations, while simultaneously cultivating profound gratitude for what you currently have. It's like a fire drill for your emotions, practicing your response to challenges before they happen, so you're prepared rather than panicked when life inevitably throws curveballs. The historical context makes this practice even more compelling. Ancient life was genuinely precarious in ways that modern people struggle to imagine. Seneca lived through political upheavals that could result in exile or execution overnight. Marcus Aurelius dealt with plagues that killed significant portions of the population. Epictetus experienced slavery and physical disability. These weren't abstract philosophical concepts. They were daily realities that required practical coping strategies. The Stoics developed negative visualization not as an intellectual exercise, but as essential mental training for navigating an unpredictable world. Here's the quirky detail that most modern interpretations miss. The Stoics borrowed this technique from athletes and military strategists who understood that mental rehearsal improved actual performance. Roman gladiators would visualize different combat scenarios, not to become fearful, but to develop automatic responses that could save their lives. Similarly, Stoic negative visualization isn't about dwelling on worst-case scenarios. It's about building the mental muscle memory that allows you to respond to challenges with wisdom rather than panic. The practice works on multiple psychological levels simultaneously. First, it reduces stress by making the unknown known. Most of our fears are worse in imagination than in reality because we haven't actually thought through how we would handle difficult situations. When you systematically consider how you would cope with job loss, relationship problems, or health issues, you often discover that you're more resilient and resourceful than your stress gives you credit for. The monster in the dark shrinks when you turn on the lights and see it's just a pile of laundry. Second, negative visualization creates what psychologists now call hedonic adaptation reset. You become so accustomed to your current circumstances that you stop appreciating them. Your comfortable bed, reliable income, healthy relationships, and basic freedoms become invisible background conditions rather than remarkable privileges. By briefly imagining their absence, you suddenly see them clearly again. It's like taking off sunglasses you forgot you were wearing. Everything becomes brighter and more vivid. The modern application starts with small, manageable scenarios rather than jumping straight to existential catastrophes. Tonight, as you lie in your comfortable bed, briefly imagine sleeping on the floor. Notice how much more grateful you feel for your mattress, pillows, and blankets. Imagine being hungry and appreciate the fact that you have food available. Imagine being lonely and feel gratitude for the people who care about you, even if they're not physically present right now. Historians still argue whether the Stoics practiced negative visualization daily or reserved it for specific circumstances, but the letters and personal writings suggest it was a regular part of their mental hygiene routine. Seneca would imagine losing his wealth. Marcus Aurelius would contemplate his own mortality, and Epictetus would remind himself that his freedom could be taken away again at any moment. This wasn't morbid obsession. It was practical preparation that allowed them to enjoy good times fully while remaining steady during difficult periods. The technique becomes especially powerful when applied to relationships. Instead of taking your loved ones for granted, occasionally imagine what life would be like without them. This isn't about becoming clingy or paranoid. It's about appreciating their presence while you have it and treating them with the kindness and attention they deserve. Every conversation becomes more precious when you remember it's not guaranteed to continue forever. Every ordinary moment becomes extraordinary when viewed through the lens of impermanence. Career stress responds particularly well to negative visualization because most professional fears dissolve under careful examination. Imagine actually losing your job. What would you do? You'd probably update your resume, reach out to your network, maybe take some time to reassess your career direction, and eventually find something else. You've survived job changes before, and you'd survive them again. The anticipatory stress is almost always worse than the actual experience of navigating professional transitions. The practice also works for health worries, financial concerns, and social anxieties. When you actually think through how you would handle medical challenges, economic setbacks, or social embarrassment, you usually discover that you have more resources, internal and external, than your worried mind assumes. You remember that you've overcome difficulties before, that you have people who would help you, and that most problems have solutions, even if they're not immediately obvious. But here's the crucial balance. Negative visualization should leave you feeling more grateful and prepared, not more worried and pessimistic. If the practice increases your worry rather than reducing it, you're probably dwelling on problems rather than rehearsing solutions. The goal is to build confidence in your ability to handle whatever life brings, not to convince yourself that everything will go wrong. The evening is actually the perfect time for this practice because it naturally leads to appreciation for your current circumstances. As you settle into bed, briefly imagine what it would be like to be homeless. And suddenly, your bedroom becomes a sanctuary. Imagine being seriously ill, and your current health becomes a gift. Imagine being estranged from everyone you love, and your relationships become treasures worth protecting. Tonight, try a gentle version of negative visualization. Pick one thing you normally take for granted: your ability to read, your access to clean water, your freedom to choose what to think about, and briefly imagine not having it. Notice how this shifts your perspective on what you actually possess right now. Then let that gratitude settle into your body like warm honey, sweetening your transition into sleep. The Stoics understood that life is both more fragile and more resilient than we usually imagine. Things can change quickly, but humans are remarkably adaptable. By practicing negative visualization, you're not inviting problems. You're building the psychological strength to handle whatever comes while fully appreciating what you have right now. You're scrolling through news headlines at 11:30 p.m., pandemic updates, economic uncertainty, political chaos, climate change reports, international conflicts, and that familiar weight settles in your chest as you realize how little control you have over any of it. The world feels increasingly unpredictable, like someone shuffled the deck of reality and forgot to tell you the new rules. This is where the Stoics offer their most profound insight. Uncertainty isn't a bug in the system of life. It's a feature, and learning to dance with unpredictability rather than fighting it becomes the foundation of genuine peace. Marcus Aurelius understood this intimately. He ruled an empire during what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century, a period of political instability, economic collapse, plague, and military threats that made our current global challenges look manageable by comparison. The Antonine Plague killed millions across the Roman Empire. Barbarian tribes pressed against the frontiers, and internal rebellions threatened the stability he was trying to maintain. Yet his personal writings reveal not worry about uncertainty, but a deep acceptance of change as the fundamental nature of existence. The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it, he wrote, probably while sitting in his command tent, listening to reports of yet another crisis requiring his attention. He wasn't being philosophical in an abstract sense. He was developing practical wisdom for navigating a world where the only predictable thing was unpredictability. Every decision he made had to account for variables beyond his control. Every plan had to include contingencies for unexpected developments, and every day brought news that could reshape the entire strategic landscape. The historical context reveals something fascinating about how ancient people related to uncertainty. They lived much closer to the edge of survival than most modern people, with crop failures, disease outbreaks, and political upheavals regularly disrupting entire communities. Yet they also had philosophical frameworks for understanding change as natural rather than aberrant. The Stoics drew heavily from Heraclitus, who famously observed that you can't step in the same river twice because the water is always flowing. They understood that trying to create permanent stability in an inherently dynamic universe was like trying to nail jello to a wall, frustrating and ultimately futile. Here's the quirky detail that most philosophy courses skip. The Stoics were actually influenced by early scientific thinking about natural processes. They observed that everything in nature, from weather patterns to human bodies to political systems, followed cycles of growth, stability, decline, and renewal. What we experience as disruptive uncertainty was, to them, just the visible surface of deeper natural rhythms. Historians still argue whether this perspective made them fatalistic or liberated them from the exhausting attempt to control uncontrollable processes. The modern stress about uncertainty is amplified by our unprecedented access to information about global events we can't influence. You know about economic indicators in countries you'll never visit, political developments that affect people you'll never meet, and environmental changes happening on timescales that dwarf individual human lives. Your nervous system, evolved to handle local, immediate threats, is constantly activated by abstract, distant possibilities that your rational mind knows you can't do anything about. The Stoic approach to uncertainty starts with a fundamental reframe. Instead of seeing unpredictability as a problem to be solved, see it as a condition to be accepted and worked with skillfully. This doesn't mean becoming passive or fatalistic. It means becoming strategically flexible. When you stop wasting energy trying to create certainty in an uncertain world, you have more resources available for adapting to whatever actually happens. The practical application begins with distinguishing between different types of uncertainty. There's the uncertainty you can influence through preparation, like building an emergency fund, maintaining your health, or developing multiple skills. There's the uncertainty you can't influence, but can prepare for psychologically, like economic recessions, natural disasters, or global political changes. And there's the uncertainty that's so far beyond your control that the wisest response is simply to acknowledge it and focus your attention elsewhere. This becomes especially relevant for the evening news stress that keeps so many people awake. The 24-hour news cycle is designed to make every development seem urgent and personally relevant, even when most global events have minimal direct impact on your daily life. The Stoics would see this as a category error. You're treating distant, abstract uncertainties as immediate personal threats, which activates your stress response without providing any useful information for action. Marcus Aurelius had a particularly elegant way of handling uncertainty about the future. He would focus intensely on doing his best with current circumstances while holding future outcomes lightly. He couldn't control whether his military campaigns would succeed, whether the plague would end, or whether his political reforms would survive his passing. But he could control his effort, his decision-making process, and his response to whatever information became available. The modern equivalent might be approaching your career, relationships, and personal goals with serious commitment while maintaining psychological flexibility about outcomes. You work hard on your projects while accepting that market conditions might change. You invest deeply in relationships while understanding that people grow and sometimes grow apart. You make plans while staying open to opportunities you can't currently imagine. Here's where uncertainty becomes almost liberating. When you truly accept that you can't predict or control most of what happens, you stop carrying the psychological burden of trying to manage outcomes beyond your influence. It's like setting down a heavy backpack you didn't realize you were carrying. Suddenly, you can move more freely and respond more creatively to whatever terrain you encounter. The Stoic practice of reserve clause becomes particularly relevant here. When making plans, they would add the mental footnote, fate permitting, or if nothing prevents it. This wasn't pessimism, it was psychological insurance against the disappointment and stress that comes from treating preferences as requirements. You can hope for specific outcomes while remaining internally prepared for different possibilities. Tonight, as your mind churns through all the uncertainties facing your personal life and the wider world, remember Marcus Aurelius, writing by candlelight in his military tent, surrounded by reports of problems he couldn't solve and challenges he couldn't predict. He found peace not by eliminating uncertainty, but by accepting it as the natural condition of existence and focusing his energy on what he could actually influence in the present moment. The most profound realization is that uncertainty, properly understood, is actually the source of all possibility. If everything were predetermined and predictable, there would be no room for growth, creativity, or positive change. The same unpredictability that creates stress also creates opportunity. The future that worries you might also surprise you in wonderful ways you can't currently imagine. You're lying there, thinking about that embarrassing thing you said 3 years ago, that relationship that ended badly, the job you didn't get, the opportunities you missed. And suddenly, you're not just accepting these experiences, you're actively wishing they had never happened. But what if there was a way to go beyond mere acceptance, beyond even finding meaning in difficulty, to actually embracing everything that has happened to you as necessary for becoming who you are? This is where we encounter one of the most radical ideas in philosophy, amor fati, the love of fate, a concept that transforms your relationship with every aspect of your life story. The phrase amor fati was popularized by Friedrich Nietzsche, but the underlying concept runs deep through Stoic philosophy. Marcus Aurelius wrote about not just accepting what happens, but welcoming it as if you had chosen it yourself. Epictetus taught that freedom comes from wanting what happens rather than trying to make happen what you want. But Nietzsche took this idea and cranked it up to 11, suggesting that true psychological health requires not just accepting your life, but loving it so completely that you would choose to live it exactly the same way, infinite times. The historical development of this concept is fascinating. Ancient Stoics focused primarily on acceptance and working skillfully with circumstances beyond their control. They understood that fighting reality was futile and that wisdom lay in aligning yourself with the natural order rather than opposing it. But they generally framed this as a practical necessity rather than something to actively celebrate. Nietzsche, writing in 19th century Germany while dealing with chronic illness and social isolation, pushed the concept towards something more emotionally demanding and potentially more liberating. Here's the quirky detail that most people miss. Nietzsche developed his most intense formulations of amor fati while suffering from severe headaches, digestive problems, and the social rejection that came from his unconventional ideas. He wasn't writing from a place of comfortable philosophical detachment. He was trying to find a way to affirm a life that included significant physical and emotional pain. His personal letters reveal someone working desperately to transform his relationship with suffering rather than simply endure it. The practical application of amor fati starts with a thought experiment that might initially seem impossible. Imagine that before you were born, you had the opportunity to review your entire life story, every joy and sorrow, every success and failure, every moment of connection and every experience of loss, and you chose it all, knowing that this specific combination of experiences would create exactly the person you are right now. Can you find a way to be grateful for that choice? This isn't about pretending that painful experiences were actually good or that you should seek out suffering for its own sake. It's about recognizing that your difficulties have contributed to your depth, your compassion, your resilience, and your wisdom in ways that a life of pure comfort never could have. The relationship that broke your heart taught you something about love that you couldn't have learned any other way. The job you lost opened a door to opportunities you wouldn't have discovered otherwise. The challenges that felt overwhelming at the time built strength you didn't know you possessed. Historians still argue whether amor fati represents a psychologically healthy approach to trauma or a form of philosophical bypassing that avoids processing legitimate grief and anger. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. It's a practice that works best after you've done the hard work of feeling your feelings, learning from your experiences, and integrating difficult events into a coherent life narrative. You can't skip straight to loving your fate without first honestly acknowledging what that fate has included. The modern application becomes especially powerful when dealing with the kinds of experiences that keep people awake at night, replaying what if scenarios. What if you had chosen a different career path? What if you had stayed in that relationship? What if you had taken that risk or avoided that mistake? Amor fati suggests a different question. What if the path you actually took, including all its apparent detours and dead ends, was exactly what you needed to become who you are meant to be? This perspective transforms regret from a source of ongoing suffering into a doorway to self-acceptance. Instead of carrying the weight of past decisions that can't be changed, you begin to see your entire life story, including the parts you wish had gone differently, as a coherent narrative that has brought you to this moment with whatever wisdom, strength, and capacity for love you currently possess. The practice becomes particularly relevant for dealing with current challenges that feel overwhelming or unfair. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" Amor fati invites the question, "How is this experience contributing to my growth in ways I might not yet understand?" This doesn't mean becoming passive in the face of difficulties. It means engaging with challenges from a place of curiosity and trust rather than resentment and resistance. The relationship between amor fati and that negative visualization we explored earlier becomes clear here. When you practice imagining loss, you're building appreciation for what you have. When you practice amor fati, you're building appreciation for what you've experienced, including the losses that have already happened. Together, these practices create a kind of psychological completeness, gratitude for your present circumstances, and acceptance of your past experiences. But here's where amor fati gets really interesting. It's not just about making peace with your personal history. It's about embracing your role in the larger story of existence. Your life, with all its apparent randomness and imperfection, is part of a cosmic process that's been unfolding for billions of years. The same forces that created stars and galaxies also created the specific circumstances that led to your birth, your experiences, in this moment of consciousness reading these words. The evening application of amor fati can be profoundly calming. Instead of lying awake rehearsing regrets or worrying about future uncertainties, you can practice gratitude for the entire trajectory that has brought you to this comfortable bed in this particular place, with whatever people and possibilities currently surround your life. Even the stress you're feeling becomes part of the story worth embracing, evidence of a mind that cares deeply about living well. Tonight, try this gentle experiment. Think of one experience from your past that you've always wished had gone differently. Instead of focusing on how it should have been different, try to identify one way that experience contributed to your current wisdom, compassion, or strength. Can you find even a small spark of gratitude for what that difficult experience taught you, or how it shaped you into someone capable of helping others who face similar challenges? The most radical realization of Amor Fati is that your life doesn't need to be perfect to be perfectly yours. Every experience, beautiful and painful, chosen and imposed, successful and failed, has contributed to the unique perspective you bring to the world. In a universe of infinite possibilities, you got to be you, with your specific combination of experiences, insights, and capacity for love. That's not a consolation prize. That's a miracle worth celebrating. You wake up tomorrow morning and immediately reach for your phone. But what if, instead of diving straight into the digital chaos, you took just 5 minutes to set your philosophical compass for the day? The Stoics understood that how you begin each day determines the quality of everything that follows, and they developed specific practices for weaving ancient wisdom into the rhythm of modern life. These aren't elaborate rituals requiring hours of meditation. They're micro practices that fit into the spaces between your existing habits, transforming ordinary moments into opportunities for philosophical growth. The morning reflection starts before you even get out of bed. Marcus Aurelius would begin each day by reminding himself of what he might encounter: difficult people, unexpected challenges, frustrating delays, and his own tendency toward irritation or stress. But instead of dreading these possibilities, he would prepare himself to respond with virtue. Today I will meet with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness, he wrote, not as pessimistic prediction, but as realistic preparation that allowed him to maintain equanimity when these challenges inevitably appeared. The historical context makes this practice even more relevant. Roman mornings were often chaotic affairs involving household management, political obligations, client meetings, and the constant stream of information and requests that came with positions of responsibility. Sound familiar? Marcus Aurelius wasn't writing from a peaceful monastery. He was trying to maintain philosophical perspective while managing an empire, dealing with military campaigns, and navigating the complex social dynamics of imperial court life. Here's the quirky detail that most modern productivity guides miss. The Stoics didn't separate their philosophical practice from their daily responsibilities. They integrated wisdom-seeking into the mundane activities of washing, dressing, eating, and commuting. Seneca would use his morning routine as an opportunity to practice gratitude for basic comforts. Epictetus would remind himself during daily activities that external circumstances were just raw material for practicing virtue. They understood that transformation happens in ordinary moments, not just during designated meditation periods. The modern morning routine can become a series of philosophical checkpoints that set your internal state for whatever the day brings. While brushing your teeth, you might practice gratitude for your health and access to clean water. While getting dressed, you could remind yourself that your worth isn't determined by your appearance or others' opinions. While checking the weather, you might practice accepting conditions you can't control while preparing appropriately for what you can influence. The commute, whether it's walking to your home office or sitting in traffic, offers perfect opportunities for Stoic practice. Instead of treating delays as personal affronts, you can use unexpected time for reflection or mental rehearsal of how you want to handle the day's challenges. Instead of getting frustrated with other drivers or crowded public transportation, you can practice seeing these as opportunities to develop patience and understanding for fellow humans who are also just trying to get through their day. Historians still argue whether the Stoics practiced formal meditation in the way we understand it today, but their writings reveal sophisticated techniques for maintaining present moment awareness throughout daily activities. They would pause regularly to check their internal state, notice their judgments and reactions, and gently redirect their attention toward virtue and wisdom, rather than getting caught up in external circumstances. The transition moments between activities become especially important for philosophical practice. Before entering a meeting, you might take 3 breaths and remind yourself to listen more than you speak. Before opening your laptop, you could set an intention to work with focus and integrity rather than just checking items off a list. Before answering your phone, you might pause to remember that the person calling is a fellow human being deserving of patience and kindness. Lunchtime offers a natural opportunity for the kind of reflection that the Stoics valued. Instead of scrolling through social media while eating, you could practice mindful appreciation for your food, gratitude for the people who grew and prepared it, and awareness of how fortunate you are to have reliable access to nutrition. This isn't about becoming precious or overly philosophical. It's about using ordinary moments to cultivate the perspective that makes everything else more enjoyable. The afternoon energy dip that most people experience around 2 or 3 p.m. becomes a perfect time for what Seneca called taking stock. How has your day gone so far? Have you responded to challenges with wisdom or reactivity? Have you treated people with kindness? Have you focused on what you can control rather than getting frustrated with what you can't? This isn't about judging yourself harshly. It's about gentle course correction that helps you finish the day aligned with your values. The evening transition from work to personal time deserves special attention in our always connected world. The Stoics understood the importance of mental boundaries, and they would use specific practices to shift from public responsibilities to private reflection. You might create a simple ritual, changing clothes, taking a short walk, or spending 5 minutes in silence that signals to your mind that the workday is complete and it's time to focus on relationships, rest, and renewal. The key to making these practices sustainable is starting small and building gradually. Pick one transition moment in your day, maybe the few minutes between waking up and checking your phone, or the walk from your car to your office, and use it for a brief Stoic reflection. Notice how this small change affects your mood, your reactions, and your overall sense of groundedness throughout the day. The beauty of integrating Stoic practices into daily life is that they don't require additional time. They transform time you're already spending into opportunities for growth and wisdom. Waiting in line becomes a chance to practice patience. Traffic jams become opportunities for acceptance. Difficult conversations become laboratories for a developing virtue. Every moment becomes a chance to align your actions with your values. Tonight, as you prepare for tomorrow, consider choosing one small way to weave philosophical reflection into your morning routine. Maybe it's 3 deep breaths before getting out of bed while setting an intention for the day. Maybe it's expressing gratitude for something specific while drinking your coffee. Maybe it's reminding yourself of the dichotomy of control while checking the weather. These tiny practices, repeated consistently, create the foundation for the kind of wisdom that makes daily life not just bearable, but meaningful. The Stoics understood that philosophy isn't something you do for an hour on weekends. It's a way of approaching every moment with intention, wisdom, and grace. Tomorrow morning, you have the opportunity to begin living like the person you want to become, one mindful moment at a time. You're finally settling into bed after a long day, but your mind is still racing through everything that happened. The conversation that went sideways, the deadline you're worried about, the email you probably should have worded differently. This is where the Stoics offer you one of their most practical gifts, the evening reflection, a gentle practice of reviewing your day, not to judge yourself harshly, but to extract wisdom from experience and prepare your mind for restorative sleep. Think of it as a philosophical debrief that transforms the chaos of daily life into material for growth. The practice comes from the Pythagoreans, those ancient mathematicians who believed that numbers held the secrets of the universe. But the Stoics adopted and refined it into something beautifully practical. Seneca wrote about his nightly habit of reviewing the day's events, examining his responses to challenges, and identifying opportunities for improvement. When the light has been removed and my wife has fallen silent, he described, I examine the whole day and go back over what I've done and said, hiding nothing from myself, passing nothing by. The historical context reveals something touching about this practice. These weren't perfect people conducting academic exercises. They were humans struggling with the same kinds of daily frustrations, relationship challenges, and professional pressures that keep you awake at night. Seneca dealt with difficult political situations, family tensions, and his own tendencies toward anger and impatience. Marcus Aurelius wrestled with the burden of enormous responsibility and his own worried temperament. They developed evening reflection, not because they had it all figured out, but because they needed practical tools for learning from their mistakes and sleeping peacefully despite their imperfections. Here's the quirky detail that makes this practice even more relatable. Seneca specifically mentions that he would wait until his wife was asleep before beginning his evening reflection, suggesting that even ancient philosophers had to navigate the social dynamics of bedtime routines. He understood that this kind of introspection required privacy and quiet, but he also made it clear that it wasn't about withdrawing from relationships. It was about becoming a better partner, friend, and citizen through honest self-examination. The modern evening reflection starts with a simple question. How did I live today? Not what did I accomplish or how productive was I, but how did I live? This shifts the focus from external achievements to internal alignment. Did you respond to challenges with wisdom or reactivity? Did you treat people with kindness? Did you focus on what you could control rather than getting frustrated with what you couldn't? Did you act according to your values, even when it was difficult? or inconvenient. The practice works best when you approach it with curiosity rather than judgment. You're not conducting a performance review or beating yourself up for mistakes. You're gathering data about your patterns, triggers, and growth edges. When you notice that you got frustrated in traffic, instead of criticizing yourself, you might explore what that reaction reveals about your expectations and how you could respond differently next time. When you remember a moment of patience or kindness, you can appreciate that choice and consider how to cultivate more of those responses. Historians still argue whether the Stoics wrote down their evening reflections or simply conducted them mentally, but the evidence suggests both approaches were used depending on circumstances and personal preference. Seneca's letters often reference insights from his nightly reviews, while Marcus Aurelius's Meditations reads like a collection of evening reflections written during military campaigns when he had time to process the day's events in writing. The emotional processing aspect of evening reflection is particularly important for sleep quality. When you don't take time to consciously review and integrate the day's experiences, your mind often does this, processing unconsciously during the night, leading to restless sleep, vivid dreams, or that feeling of waking up tired despite getting enough hours in bed. By deliberately reflecting on your experiences before sleep, you're helping your brain organize and file away the day's events, creating space for genuine rest and renewal. The practice becomes especially valuable for handling difficult emotions that might otherwise keep you awake. If you had a conflict with someone, instead of replaying the conversation endlessly and imagining better comebacks, you can examine what the situation taught you about communication, boundaries, or your own triggers. If you made a mistake at work, instead of spiraling into self-criticism, you can identify what you learn and how you'll apply that knowledge going forward. The gratitude component of evening reflection often surprises people with its power. After examining challenges and growth opportunities, you spend time appreciating what went well, moments of connection, small accomplishments, experiences of beauty, or simply the basic privileges of safety, shelter, and sustenance. This isn't forced positivity. It's training your attention to notice the good that's always present alongside the difficulties. The preparation aspect looks ahead to tomorrow, but not in a worried, planning-obsessed way. Instead, you might set a gentle intention for how you want to show up tomorrow, perhaps with more patience, greater focus, or deeper appreciation for the people in your life. You might identify one specific situation where you want to practice a Stoic principle, like accepting what you can't control or responding to criticism with equanimity. The physical setup for evening reflection can be as simple as sitting on the edge of your bed for 5 minutes before lying down, or as elaborate as keeping a journal and writing out your thoughts. The key is consistency rather than complexity. A brief, regular practice is more valuable than an elaborate routine you only do occasionally. Some people prefer to reflect while taking a shower or during other quiet evening activities, integrating the practice into existing routines rather than adding another item to their schedule. Tonight, try this gentle version of evening reflection. Think of one moment from today when you responded to a challenge with wisdom rather than reactivity. Appreciate that choice and consider how it felt different from times when you've been more reactive. Then think of one thing you're genuinely grateful for from today. Perhaps something so ordinary you almost overlooked it. Finally, set a simple intention for tomorrow. One way you want to practice being the person you're becoming. The most beautiful aspect of evening reflection is how it transforms your relationship with time itself. Instead of days blurring together in an endless stream of busyness, each day becomes a distinct chapter in your ongoing story of growth and learning. You begin to see patterns in your behavior, celebrate genuine progress, and approach challenges as opportunities for practicing wisdom rather than just obstacles to endure. As you settle into sleep tonight, remember Seneca in his quiet room, reviewing his day with gentle honesty and preparing his mind for rest. You're part of a tradition that stretches back thousands of years, humans seeking to live wisely, learn from experience, and find peace in the midst of life's beautiful chaos. You're lying there, wondering how someone who literally ruled the known world could possibly understand your stress about Monday morning meetings, your social media comparison spirals, or your 3 a.m. worries about whether you're living up to your potential. But Marcus Aurelius, despite commanding legions and governing an empire that stretched from Britain to the Middle East, left behind one of history's most intimate records of someone struggling with the same fundamental human challenges that keep you awake at night. His personal journal, never intended for publication, reveals an worried mind learning to find peace through philosophical practice. Picture the most powerful man in the world sitting in his tent on the Germanic frontier, writing by candlelight about his tendency to worry, his frustration with difficult people, and his struggle to maintain perspective amid overwhelming responsibilities. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength, he reminded himself, not as abstract wisdom, but as practical advice for getting through another day of managing an empire while battling his own worried temperament. The historical context makes Marcus Aurelius's stress even more relatable. He inherited the throne during what historians call the height of Roman prosperity, but his reign was marked by constant crises. The Antonine Plague killed millions of his subjects. Germanic tribes threatened the northern borders, and internal rebellions challenged imperial authority. He spent most of his reign away from Rome, living in military camps and dealing with problems that had no clear solutions. Every decision affected millions of lives. Every mistake could destabilize the empire, and every day brought reports of new challenges requiring his attention. Here's the quirky detail that humanizes this legendary figure. Marcus Aurelius was apparently a terrible public speaker who suffered from stage fright despite being required to address the Senate, military commanders, and public assemblies regularly. Ancient sources describe him as soft-spoken and philosophical in temperament, more comfortable with books than crowds. He was essentially an introverted intellectual thrust into the ultimate extroverted leadership role, trying to manage his own social stress while projecting confidence to an empire that depended on his strength. His meditations read like a masterclass in managing overwhelming responsibility without losing your sanity. Confine yourself to the present, he wrote, recognizing his tendency to catastrophize about future challenges or ruminate on past decisions. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. This wasn't pessimism. It was psychological preparation that allowed him to respond to difficult people with patience rather than surprise or frustration. The modern application of Marcus Aurelius's approach to stress starts with recognizing that external circumstances don't determine internal peace. Whether you're managing a team of 5 or an empire of 50 million, whether you're worried about paying rent or funding military campaigns, the fundamental challenge remains the same. How do you maintain equanimity when everything feels overwhelming and uncertain? His answer was to focus relentlessly on what he could control: his responses, his effort, his values, while accepting everything else as raw material for practicing virtue. His technique for handling criticism and social pressure speaks directly to our age of social media stress and professional stress. How much trouble he avoids, who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does. He observed, understanding that other people's opinions exist in their minds, not in reality. When senators criticized his policies or citizens complained about his decisions, he would remind himself that their judgments were just thoughts in their heads, no more substantial than clouds passing overhead. Historians still argue whether Marcus Aurelius's philosophical writings reflect genuine inner peace or ongoing struggle with stress and melancholy, but the evidence suggests both. His journal entries reveal someone who had to work daily to maintain philosophical perspective, who struggled with the same human tendencies toward worry and frustration that affect everyone. The difference was his commitment to using Stoic principles as practical tools rather than abstract concepts. The responsibility stress that Marcus Aurelius experienced, the weight of knowing that your decisions affect other people's lives, translates directly to modern leadership challenges, parenting concerns, and even the everyday responsibility of being a good friend, partner, or citizen. When you feel overwhelmed by the impact your choices might have on others, his approach offers a framework. Do your best with the information available. Accept that you can't control outcomes, and trust that acting according to your values is enough. His method for handling information overload is particularly relevant to our current moment. As emperor, he received constant reports about military situations, economic conditions, political developments, and social problems throughout the empire. Rather than trying to track every detail or solve every problem personally, he focused on the decisions that were actually his to make and the actions that were actually within his power. He understood that trying to micromanage an empire was a recipe for stress and ineffectiveness. The evening routine that Marcus Aurelius developed for processing the day's challenges mirrors the reflection practice we explored earlier, but with the added weight of imperial responsibility. He would review his decisions, examine his responses to difficult people, and prepare mentally for the next day's challenges. But instead of carrying the weight of unsolved problems into sleep, he would remind himself that he had done his best with the circumstances he faced, and that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to practice wisdom. His approach to mortality, constantly reminding himself that life is brief and uncertain, wasn't morbid obsession, but practical perspective that helped him prioritize what actually mattered. When you're worried about relatively minor social or professional concerns, remembering that Marcus Aurelius dealt with plagues, wars, and the constant possibility of assassination while maintaining philosophical equanimity can help put your own challenges in perspective. The most touching aspect of his personal writings is how they reveal someone who never stopped working on himself, never claimed to have achieved perfect wisdom, and never pretended that philosophical practice eliminated human struggles. He was learning as he went, using Stoic principles as tools for navigating an impossible job while trying to remain a decent human being. His stress wasn't a weakness to overcome. It was evidence of a conscience that cared deeply about doing the right thing. Tonight, as you lie there, worrying about your responsibilities and wondering if you're handling them well enough, remember Marcus Aurelius in his tent, writing by candlelight about the same fundamental human challenges you're facing. The scale of responsibility may be different, but the internal work of maintaining perspective, focusing on what you can control, and treating yourself and others with compassion remains exactly the same. The emperor, who could have had anything, chose to spend his evenings writing reminders to himself about patience, acceptance, and the importance of being kind to difficult people. If that's not evidence that philosophical practice works for managing stress, regardless of your external circumstances, I don't know what is. You're scrolling through your inbox at bedtime, reading another email that makes you want to respond immediately with exactly what you think about your correspondent's unreasonable request. When you remember something Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius nearly 2,000 years ago. Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. His letters, originally private correspondence between friends, accidentally became one of history's most practical guides to managing anger, fear, and the daily frustrations that keep modern people awake at night. Lucius Annaeus Seneca wasn't writing philosophy textbooks. He was writing to a real person dealing with real problems. Lucilius was a younger friend navigating career challenges, relationship difficulties, and the general stress that comes with trying to live well in an uncertain world. Sound familiar? Seneca's letters read like a combination of life coaching, therapy, and philosophical guidance, addressing everything from how to handle difficult people to what to do when your plans fall apart, to why you shouldn't check your investment portfolio obsessively. The historical context makes these letters even more remarkable. Seneca was writing during the reign of Nero, one of history's most unpredictable and dangerous emperors. As Nero's advisor, Seneca had to navigate court politics, where saying the wrong thing could result in exile or execution, while also trying to moderate the increasingly erratic behavior of someone with absolute power. His letters to Lucilius often reflect the stress of trying to maintain ethical standards in a corrupt system while managing his own fears about political survival. Here's the quirky detail that makes Seneca's advice especially credible. He was incredibly wealthy, possibly one of the richest men in Rome, but he also understood that wealth could disappear overnight through political upheaval or economic collapse. He practiced voluntary poverty regularly, eating simple food and sleeping on hard surfaces to remind himself that happiness didn't depend on luxury. His letters frequently address the stress that comes with financial success, including the fear of losing what you've gained and the pressure to maintain a lifestyle that requires constant effort to sustain. The practical wisdom in Seneca's letters addresses the specific anxieties that keep modern people awake. When Lucilius worried about his reputation, Seneca reminded him that other people's opinions are just thoughts in their heads. no more substantial than morning mist. When Lucilius felt overwhelmed by his responsibilities, Seneca suggested focusing on one task at a time, rather than trying to solve everything simultaneously. When Lucilius struggled with anger toward difficult people, Seneca offered techniques for maintaining equanimity that sound remarkably like modern anger management strategies. His approach to fear is particularly sophisticated. Instead of trying to eliminate fear entirely, which he recognized as both impossible and undesirable, Seneca taught techniques for examining fears rationally and responding to them skillfully. We suffer more in imagination than in reality, he observed, noting that most of our stress comes from catastrophizing about future possibilities rather than dealing with present circumstances. He would encourage Lucilius to ask specific questions about his worries. What exactly are you afraid will happen? How likely is it actually to occur? What would you do if it did happen? How have you handled similar challenges in the past? The letters reveal someone who struggled with the same tendencies toward worry and overthinking that affect most people. Seneca wrote about his own battles with insomnia, his tendency to replay conversations and imagine better responses, and his difficulty accepting criticism gracefully. But instead of pretending to have overcome these human tendencies, he shared practical strategies for working with them more skillfully. Historians still argue whether Seneca's wealth and political position made his philosophical advice less authentic, but his letters reveal genuine vulnerability and ongoing struggle with the principles he advocated. He wasn't writing from a place of achieved wisdom, but from the midst of learning, sharing insights and techniques as he discovered them through his own experience of trying to live well under difficult circumstances. His advice about handling setbacks speaks directly to modern career, stress, and relationship challenges. When plans don't work out as expected, instead of seeing this as personal failure or evidence that life is unfair, Seneca suggested viewing setbacks as opportunities to practice resilience and discover new possibilities. Every change of fortune affects either our person or our possessions, he wrote, but a wise person is prepared for either. The time management wisdom in Seneca's letters predates modern productivity advice by 2 millennia, but addresses the same fundamental challenge. How do you focus on what matters when everything seems urgent? His solution was to distinguish between what he called borrowed time, hours spent on other people's priorities, and own time, moments dedicated to personal growth, reflection, and the relationships that actually matter. He understood that without protecting some time for yourself, you become a slave to external demands and lose touch with your own values and goals. His approach to anger management is especially practical for dealing with difficult people, whether they're family members, co-workers, or strangers on the internet. Instead of trying to change other people's behavior, which is impossible, Seneca focused on controlling his own responses. When someone acted unreasonably, he would remind himself that their behavior reflected their own internal state, not his worth as a person. When someone criticized him unfairly, he would look for any grain of truth in their comments, while dismissing the rest as irrelevant noise. The friendship advice in Seneca's letters addresses the loneliness and social stress that many people experience in our hyper-connected, but often superficial social environment. He distinguished between casual acquaintances and true friends, noting that real friendship requires mutual vulnerability, shared values, and the willingness to support each other through difficulties. He encouraged Lucilius to invest deeply in a few meaningful relationships, rather than trying to maintain superficial connections with everyone. His thoughts on aging and mortality provide comfort for the existential stress that often strikes during quiet evening hours. Instead of seeing aging as decline or passing as tragedy, Seneca framed both as natural processes that give meaning and urgency to life. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it, he observed, encouraging focus on the present moment rather than regret about the past or stress about the future. Tonight, as you process the day's frustrations and tomorrow's concerns, imagine having a wise friend who understands your struggles because he's faced similar challenges, someone who offers practical advice without judgment and reminds you that you're not alone in finding life difficult sometimes. That's essentially what Seneca's letters provide. The voice of someone who cared deeply about living well and was willing to share both his insights and his ongoing struggles with a friend who needed guidance. The most beautiful aspect of these letters is how they demonstrate that wisdom isn't about having all the answers. It's about asking better questions, supporting each other through difficulties, and continuing to grow regardless of your age or circumstances. Seneca was still learning, still struggling, still working to align his actions with his values, right up until his forced unalive at age 65. His legacy isn't perfection. It's the example of someone who never stopped trying to live wisely and help others do the same. You're lying there feeling trapped by your circumstances. Maybe it's a job that drains your soul, a relationship that's become toxic, financial pressures that seem insurmountable, or just the general sense that life is happening to you rather than being something you actively choose. This is where you need to meet Epictetus, a man who discovered ultimate freedom while literally chained to a Roman master, who transformed the most powerless position imaginable into a philosophy of liberation that speaks directly to anyone who's ever felt stuck by their circumstances. Born around 50 CE in what is now Turkey, Epictetus spent his early years as a slave in the household of Epaphroditus, a freedman who served in Nero's court. Imagine the psychological complexity of that situation. A slave owned by someone who had himself been enslaved, living in the center of imperial power, while having absolutely no control over his own life. He couldn't choose where to live, what to eat, how to spend his time, or even whether to continue living. Yet from this position of complete external powerlessness, he developed insights about freedom that have influenced everyone, from Roman emperors to modern psychologists. The historical details of his enslavement are both heartbreaking and inspiring. Ancient sources suggest that his leg was injured, possibly broken, by his master, leaving him permanently lame. Whether this was deliberate cruelty or an accident, Epictetus lived with physical limitation on top of legal bondage. He had every reason to become bitter, resentful, or worrying about the unfairness of his situation. Instead, he used his circumstances as a laboratory for discovering what no external force could touch: his ability to choose his responses, maintain his dignity, and find meaning regardless of what happened to his body or his legal status. Here's the quirky detail that makes his story even more remarkable. After gaining his freedom, probably when Epaphroditus died, Epictetus chose to live simply and teach philosophy rather than pursuing wealth or social status. He had experienced the worst that external circumstances could offer, and he had also discovered that happiness didn't depend on external circumstances at all. His school in Nicopolis became famous throughout the Roman world, attracting students who wanted to learn how to find freedom regardless of their situation. The practical application of Epictetus's insights starts with recognizing the difference between external freedom and internal freedom. You might not be able to change your job immediately, but you can change your attitude toward your work. You might not be able to control other people's behavior, but you can control your responses to their behavior. You might not be able to eliminate all sources of stress from your life, but you can develop the internal resources that make you less vulnerable to external pressures. His famous teaching about the dichotomy of control, which we explored earlier, came directly from his experience of having no control over external circumstances while discovering complete control over internal responses. When everything outside yourself is determined by other people's decisions, you're forced to find freedom in the only place it actually exists, in your thoughts, judgments, values, and choices about how to respond to whatever happens. The modern application becomes especially powerful when dealing with situations that feel genuinely limiting or oppressive. Maybe you're caring for aging parents and feel trapped by responsibility. Maybe you're in a job you hate but can't leave due to financial obligations. Maybe you're dealing with chronic illness that restricts your options. Epictetus would recognize all of these as external circumstances that provide opportunities for practicing internal freedom rather than obstacles to happiness. Historians still argue whether Epictetus's philosophy represents genuine liberation or psychological adaptation to oppression, but his students' accounts suggest someone who radiated genuine joy and peace despite his difficult background. He wasn't teaching people to accept injustice passively. He was teaching them to maintain their humanity and dignity, regardless of how others treated them. There's a crucial difference between resignation and acceptance, between giving up and choosing your battles wisely. His approach to handling criticism and social pressure is particularly relevant to our current moment of social media judgment and cancel culture stress. When people attacked his ideas or questioned his authority to teach philosophy, after all, he was a former slave with no formal credentials. He would remind himself that their opinions existed in their minds, not in reality. He couldn't control what others thought about him, but he could control whether he based his self-worth on their approval or on his own commitment to living according to his values. The relationship between external circumstances and internal freedom that Epictetus discovered applies directly to modern feelings of being trapped by economic pressures, social expectations, or family obligations. You might not be able to change your situation immediately, but you can change your relationship to your situation. Instead of seeing yourself as a victim of circumstances, you can see yourself as someone who's learning to respond to challenges with wisdom and grace. His teaching about desire and attachment offers a framework for reducing the stress that comes from wanting things you can't control. Instead of desiring specific outcomes, getting the promotion, having people like you, avoiding all discomfort, you can desire to respond virtuously to whatever outcomes actually occur. This doesn't mean becoming passive or stopping work toward your goals. It means holding your goals lightly while investing fully in the process of pursuing them. The physical limitations that Epictetus experienced throughout his life gave him unique insight into the relationship between the body and the mind. He understood that physical pain, illness, and disability could limit what you could do, but couldn't touch who you were. This perspective offers comfort to anyone dealing with health challenges, aging, or physical limitations that feel like barriers to living fully. His approach to relationships is especially wise for people who feel trapped by toxic family dynamics, difficult friendships, or romantic partnerships that have become sources of stress rather than support. You can't control how others treat you, but you can control how much power you give their treatment to affect your internal state. You can set boundaries, make difficult decisions about which relationships deserve your energy, and maintain your own integrity regardless of how others behave. The evening application of Epictetus's wisdom involves examining the day's challenges through the lens of internal versus external freedom. When you felt frustrated, angry, or worried today, was it because you were trying to control something outside your influence? When you felt peaceful and effective, was it because you were focusing on your own responses and choices? This isn't about judging yourself harshly. It's about recognizing patterns that help you locate your actual power. Tonight, as you consider whatever circumstances in your life feel limiting or overwhelming, remember Epictetus in chains, discovering that no external force could touch his essential freedom to choose his responses, maintain his values, and find meaning in his experience. His circumstances were far more restrictive than yours, yet he found a way to be genuinely free. If he could discover liberation while enslaved, you can find freedom within whatever constraints currently shape your life. The most profound realization from Epictetus's story is that freedom isn't something you achieve by changing your external circumstances. It's something you discover by changing your relationship to your external circumstances. You're already free in the ways that matter most. You just need to remember where to look for that freedom and how to exercise it wisely. You're lying there at 11:45 p.m., scrolling through news about political corruption, environmental disasters, and social injustice, feeling that familiar mix of outrage and helplessness that comes from witnessing problems you can't personally solve. Your moral compass is spinning wildly between cynicism and idealism, between wanting to fix everything and wanting to retreat from a world that seems increasingly chaotic and unfair. This is where the Stoics offer you their most practical gift: the 4 cardinal virtues that serve as an internal GPS system for navigating ethical complexity without losing your sanity or your soul. Wisdom, justice, courage, and self-discipline. These weren't abstract philosophical concepts to the ancient Stoics, but daily practices that provided clear guidance when external circumstances offered no obvious right answers. Picture Marcus Aurelius in his tent, facing decisions that would affect millions of lives, using these 4 principles to navigate political pressures, military challenges, and moral dilemmas that had no perfect solutions. Or imagine Seneca in Nero's court, trying to maintain ethical standards while advising an increasingly unstable emperor, using virtue as his compass when survival itself depended on moral flexibility. The historical context makes these virtues even more relevant to our current moment. Ancient Rome was a complex, multicultural empire dealing with economic inequality, political corruption, environmental challenges, and social tensions that sound remarkably familiar. The Stoics weren't writing from ivory towers. They were trying to live ethically while participating in systems that were often unjust, corrupt, or simply too complex for simple moral judgments. They needed practical tools for maintaining personal integrity while engaging constructively with an imperfect world. Here's the quirky detail that most modern virtue ethics miss. The Stoics understood that these four virtues were interconnected and mutually reinforcing rather than separate categories. You couldn't practice true justice without wisdom to understand complex situations, courage to act on your convictions, and self-discipline to maintain consistency over time. They saw virtue as a unified approach to living, rather than a checklist of separate behaviors to master. Wisdom, in the Stoic sense, isn't about accumulating information or winning arguments. It's about developing the judgment to distinguish between what you can and can't control, what deserves your attention and what doesn't, and what actions will actually contribute to human flourishing rather than just making you feel better about yourself. It's the kind of practical intelligence that helps you choose your battles wisely, respond to criticism constructively, and make decisions based on long-term consequences rather than immediate emotions. The modern application of wisdom involves developing what we might call ethical discernment, the ability to see through the noise of social media, outrage, political manipulation, and cultural chaos to identify what actually matters and where your energy can make a meaningful difference. Instead of getting overwhelmed by every injustice or crisis that crosses your feed, wisdom helps you focus on the problems you're actually positioned to address and the changes you can realistically influence. Justice for the Stoics wasn't about abstract fairness or perfect equality. It was about treating people with dignity, contributing to the common good, and fulfilling your responsibilities to family, community, and society. This included everything from being honest in business dealings to participating in civic life to treating servants and slaves with basic humanity. They understood that justice required both individual integrity and collective action, both personal responsibility and social engagement. The contemporary application of justice involves finding ways to contribute positively to your community while maintaining realistic expectations about what you can accomplish. Instead of feeling guilty about not solving global problems or becoming paralyzed by the scale of injustice in the world, you can focus on treating the people in your daily life with fairness and kindness while supporting larger causes in whatever ways align with your resources and circumstances. Courage, in Stoic terms, wasn't primarily about physical bravery, though that was included, but about the moral strength to do the right thing, even when it's difficult, unpopular, or personally costly. This included the courage to speak truth to power, to admit when you're wrong, to change course when new information becomes available, and to maintain your principles even when others abandon theirs. Historians still argue whether the Stoic emphasis on virtue was influenced more by Greek philosophical traditions or Roman practical concerns, but the evidence suggests both. The Greeks provided the theoretical framework, while Roman experience supplied the practical applications. The result was a virtue ethics system that worked in real-world situations involving complex relationships, competing loyalties, and imperfect information. The modern courage that most people need isn't the kind that involves physical danger. It's the everyday bravery required to have difficult conversations, set appropriate boundaries, pursue meaningful goals despite uncertainty, and maintain your values when social pressure pushes toward conformity or cynicism. It's the courage to be vulnerable in relationships, to take creative risks in your work, and to stand up for what you believe in, even when it's socially awkward. Self-discipline, the fourth virtue, ties everything together by providing the consistency and follow-through that transforms good intentions into actual character development. The Stoics understood that knowing what's right and actually doing what's right are two different things, and that the gap between knowledge and action is bridged by disciplined practice over time. This isn't about rigid self-control or punitive restriction. It's about aligning your daily choices with your deeper values rather than being constantly reactive to immediate impulses, social pressures, or emotional fluctuations. It's the discipline to turn off your phone during family time, to respond thoughtfully rather than reactively to criticism, to invest time in relationships and activities that actually matter to you, rather than just filling time with whatever's most immediately available. The integration of these four virtues creates what the Stoics called the good life, not a life free from problems or challenges, but a life lived with integrity, purpose, and resilience, regardless of external circumstances. When you're facing an ethical dilemma, you can ask, what would wisdom suggest? How can I act justly? What would courage look like in this situation? How can I maintain self-discipline in my response? The evening application involves reviewing your day through the lens of virtue rather than just productivity or achievement. Did you respond to challenges with wisdom or reactivity? Did you treat people justly, including those who couldn't do anything for you in return? Did you act with courage when it mattered, or did you take the easy path? Did you maintain self-discipline in your choices, or did you let immediate impulses override your deeper values? Tonight, as you consider the moral complexity of modern life and your own role in creating positive change, remember that the Stoics faced similar challenges in their own time. They developed these four virtues, not as perfect ideals to achieve, but as practical tools for navigating an imperfect world with integrity and purpose. You don't need to be a saint to practice virtue. You just need to be willing to keep trying, learning from your mistakes, and gradually aligning your actions with your values. The most liberating aspect of virtue ethics is that it gives you a clear framework for making decisions without requiring you to control outcomes you can't influence. You can focus on being wise, just, courageous, and disciplined in your responses to whatever situations arise, trusting that this approach will contribute to human flourishing even when you can't see the immediate results. You're scrolling through social media at midnight, watching everyone else's highlight reels while feeling increasingly isolated in your own struggles, wondering if genuine human connection even exists anymore in our hyper-connected but somehow lonely world. This is where the Stoics offer insights that feel almost prophetic about modern relationship challenges. They understood that community isn't something that happens to you, but something you actively create through how you show up for other people, even when they don't show up for you the same way. The ancient world was intensely social in ways that modern people struggle to imagine. Roman society was built around complex networks of family obligations, patron-client relationships, civic duties, and social hierarchies that required constant navigation. You couldn't retreat to your apartment and order dinner through an app. Your survival literally depended on maintaining relationships with neighbors, merchants, political allies, and extended family members. Yet despite this forced interdependence, the Stoics still had to work consciously to create meaningful connections rather than just transactional relationships. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about the challenge of loving people who disappointed him, working with colleagues who frustrated him, and maintaining compassion for citizens who seemed ungrateful for his efforts on their behalf. We were born to work together, he reminded himself, not because cooperation was always easy or pleasant, but because human flourishing was impossible in isolation. His personal writings reveal someone who had to practice patience, forgiveness, and genuine care for others as deliberate disciplines rather than natural inclinations. The historical context makes Stoic relationship advice especially relevant to our current social media age. Roman society was intensely status conscious, with complex rules about who could associate with whom, how to display wealth and power appropriately, and what kinds of relationships enhanced or damaged your reputation. People performed their social identities as carefully as modern influencers craft their online personas, and the pressure to maintain appearances often conflicted with authentic connection. Here's the quirky detail that makes ancient friendship advice surprisingly modern. Romans had a concept called amicitia that encompassed everything from casual acquaintances to intimate friendships to political alliances. They understood that different relationships served different purposes and required different levels of investment. Not everyone needed to be your best friend, but everyone deserved basic respect and kindness. This nuanced approach to social connection offers a framework for navigating modern relationship complexity without the all-or-nothing thinking that creates so much social stress. Seneca's letters to Lucilius provide a masterclass in how to maintain deep friendship across distance and time. They didn't have phones, video calls, or instant messaging, yet they sustained a meaningful connection through thoughtful correspondence that addressed real challenges, shared genuine vulnerabilities, and offered practical support. Their friendship wasn't based on constant contact or shared activities. It was built on mutual respect, intellectual growth, and the willingness to be honest about their struggles and aspirations. The Stoic approach to difficult people, and let's be honest, we all have them in our lives, starts with the recognition that you can't control other people's behavior, but you can control your responses to their behavior. Instead of trying to change your passive-aggressive coworker, manipulative family member, or chronically negative friend, you focus on maintaining your own integrity and kindness regardless of how they treat you. This doesn't mean becoming a doormat. It means setting appropriate boundaries while refusing to let other people's dysfunction determine your emotional state. The loneliness epidemic that affects so many modern people would have been familiar to ancient Stoics, who understood that physical proximity doesn't guarantee emotional connection and that you can feel isolated even in crowded spaces. Their solution wasn't to seek more social stimulation, but to develop the internal resources that make you good company for yourself and attractive company for others. When you're not desperately seeking validation or entertainment from relationships, you can offer genuine presence and support to the people in your life. Historians still argue whether Stoic emphasis on self-sufficiency made them emotionally distant or actually freed them to love more generously. But the evidence suggests the latter. When your happiness doesn't depend on other people's approval or behavior, you can engage with them from a place of strength rather than need. You can offer support without expecting reciprocation, express affection without demanding responses, and maintain loyalty without requiring perfection. The modern application of Stoic relationship principles involves shifting from a consumer mentality, what can this person do for me, to a contributor mentality, what can I offer to this person's well-being? Instead of keeping score of who calls whom first, who remembers birthdays, or who initiates social plans, you focus on being the kind of friend, family member, or colleague you would want to have in your own life. The social media comparison trap that destroys so many modern relationships dissolves when you apply Stoic principles about focusing on your own character rather than other people's apparent success or happiness. Instead of feeling inadequate because your friends seem to have more exciting lives, better relationships, or greater achievements, you can appreciate their good fortune while working on your own growth and contribution to the world. The practice of sympathia, the Stoic understanding that all humans are interconnected parts of a larger whole, transforms how you relate to strangers, difficult people, and even those who actively oppose you. When someone cuts you off in traffic, treats you rudely in a store, or disagrees with you politically, you can remember that they're dealing with their own struggles, fears, and limitations. This doesn't excuse bad behavior, but it helps you respond with wisdom rather than reactivity. The evening reflection on relationships involves examining how you showed up for the people in your life today. Did you listen more than you spoke? Did you offer support without being asked? Did you express appreciation for the people who make your life better? Did you maintain your own boundaries while respecting others? Did you contribute to the emotional atmosphere of your family, workplace, or community in ways that made things better rather than worse? The Stoic approach to family relationships is particularly helpful for navigating the complex dynamics that many people find stressful. You can love your family members without approving of all their choices, support them without enabling destructive behavior, and maintain connection without sacrificing your own well-being. The key is focusing on your own role in family dynamics rather than trying to fix or change other family members. Tonight, as you consider the relationships in your life, both the ones that nourish you and the ones that challenge you, remember that the Stoics saw community building as a fundamental human responsibility. You don't need perfect people around you to create meaningful connections. You just need to be willing to show up consistently with patience, kindness, and genuine interest in others' well-being. The most beautiful aspect of Stoic relationship wisdom is that it makes you less dependent on others for your happiness, while simultaneously making you more capable of contributing to their happiness. When you're not constantly seeking validation or approval, you have more emotional energy available for actually caring about the people in your life. When you're not trying to control how others treat you, you can focus on treating them with the respect and kindness that creates the kind of community you want to live in. You're lying there at 12:30 a.m., mind racing through worst-case scenarios about tomorrow's presentation, next month's medical test results, or whether you'll have enough money for retirement when you realize you're doing exactly what your stress wants you to do, imagining worst-case scenarios about futures that exist only in your mind, while ignoring the strength you've already demonstrated by surviving every difficult day up to this point. This is where the Stoics offer their most empowering insight. Resilience isn't something you either have or don't have. It's something you build systematically through daily practice, like developing physical fitness or learning a musical instrument. The concept of inner resilience was born from necessity in the ancient world. Life expectancy was shorter, medical care was primitive, political stability was rare, and natural disasters could wipe out entire communities without warning. The Stoics weren't developing philosophical theories in comfortable academic settings. They were creating practical tools for psychological survival in a world where external security was largely illusory. They understood that the only reliable source of stability was internal, your ability to maintain equanimity regardless of what happened around you. Marcus Aurelius built his resilience while managing an empire during one of history's most challenging periods. The Antonine Plague killed millions of his subjects. Germanic tribes threatened the northern frontiers, and internal rebellions challenged imperial stability. Every day brought reports of new crises requiring his attention. Yet his personal writings reveal someone who maintained philosophical perspective by treating each challenge as an opportunity to practice virtue rather than evidence that life was unfair or overwhelming. The historical context reveals something crucial about resilience. It's not about avoiding difficulties or pretending they don't affect you. It's about developing the internal resources that allow you to function effectively and maintain your humanity, even when external circumstances are genuinely difficult. The Stoics experienced real losses, faced genuine threats, and dealt with legitimate reasons for stress. Their resilience came not from denial, but from realistic preparation and philosophical perspective. Here's the quirky detail that makes ancient resilience training surprisingly modern. The Stoics understood that mental strength, like physical strength, required progressive training rather than sudden transformation. They developed specific exercises for building psychological fitness, negative visualization to prepare for setbacks, morning reflections to set intentions, evening reviews to learn from experience, and regular reminders about what they could and couldn't control. They approached inner development with the same systematic approach that athletes use for physical training. The modern application starts with recognizing that resilience isn't a personality trait you're born with or without. It's a skill set you can develop through practice. Every time you choose to respond thoughtfully rather than reactively to a challenge, you're building resilience. Every time you focus on what you can control rather than what you can't, you're strengthening your psychological immune system. Every time you find meaning in difficulty rather than just enduring it, you're developing the kind of inner strength that makes you less vulnerable to future setbacks. The practical exercises for building resilience mirror those ancient Stoic practices, but adapted for contemporary life. Start your day by mentally preparing for potential challenges, not to become pessimistic, but to avoid being blindsided by normal human difficulties like traffic delays, technology problems, or interpersonal conflicts. When these predictable annoyances occur, you can respond with patience rather than surprise or frustration. Historians still argue whether Stoic resilience represents genuine psychological health or a form of emotional suppression, but modern research supports their approach. Studies show that people who practice acceptance of difficult emotions, focus on what they can control, and find meaning in adversity demonstrate better mental health outcomes than those who avoid challenges or rely primarily on external sources of security and validation. The relationship between resilience and vulnerability is particularly important to understand. Building inner strength doesn't mean becoming emotionally numb or pretending that losses don't hurt. The most resilient people are often those who can feel deeply while maintaining perspective, who can acknowledge pain without being overwhelmed by it, and who can grieve losses while continuing to engage with life. Resilience includes the capacity to be appropriately vulnerable rather than defensively closed off. The modern workplace provides endless opportunities for resilience training, though most people don't recognize them as such. Every difficult conversation with a colleague, every project that doesn't go as planned, every instance of criticism or rejection becomes a chance to practice responding with wisdom rather than reactivity. Instead of seeing professional challenges as evidence of your inadequacy or proof that life is unfair, you can frame them as resistance training for your psychological muscles. The financial stress that keeps so many people awake at night responds particularly well to Stoic resilience building. While you can't control market fluctuations, economic conditions, or unexpected expenses, you can control your preparation, your spending habits, your skill development, and your response to financial setbacks. Building financial resilience isn't just about accumulating money. It's about developing the psychological flexibility that allows you to adapt to changing economic circumstances without losing your sense of security or self-worth. The health challenges that become more prominent as we age offer another arena for resilience practice. You can't control whether you develop chronic conditions, experience injuries, or face the inevitable decline that comes with aging, but you can control how you respond to physical limitations and health scares. The Stoics understood that the body is temporary and fragile, but that doesn't make physical challenges less difficult. It just provides perspective that helps you focus on what remains within your control. The evening practice for building resilience involves reviewing the day's challenges through the lens of growth rather than just survival. When you face difficulties today, did you respond with wisdom or reactivity? What did you learn about your own patterns, triggers, and resources? How did you demonstrate strength you didn't know you possessed? What would you do differently if faced with similar challenges in the future? The social dimension of resilience is often overlooked, but crucial for long-term psychological health. Building strong relationships, contributing to your community, and maintaining connections with people who share your values creates a support network that makes you more resilient to individual setbacks. The Stoics understood that humans are social creatures and that individual strength is enhanced by community connection rather than threatened by it. Tonight, as you consider whatever challenges currently feel overwhelming in your life, remember that you've already survived 100% of your difficult days so far. The stress you're feeling right now is evidence of a mind that cares about outcomes, not evidence of weakness or inadequacy. Every challenge you faced has contributed to the resilience you possess right now, even if you don't always recognize your own strength. The most empowering realization about resilience is that it's not about becoming invulnerable to life's difficulties. It's about developing the confidence that you can handle whatever comes, learn from whatever happens, and maintain your essential humanity regardless of external circumstances. You're stronger than you think, more adaptable than you realize, and more capable of growth than your stress wants you to believe. You're holding on to that grudge like it's a precious treasure, replaying the conversation where someone wronged you, crafting perfect comebacks for arguments that ended months ago, and wondering why you can't seem to move past disappointments that your rational mind knows don't matter anymore. This is where the Stoics offer one of their most liberating teachings. The art of letting go isn't about forgetting what happened or pretending it doesn't matter. It's about releasing your grip on outcomes you can't change, so you can redirect that energy toward creating the life you actually want to live. The ancient understanding of attachment was sophisticated in ways that modern self-help often misses. The Stoics weren't advocating for emotional numbness or indifference to outcomes. They were teaching strategic detachment that allowed for full engagement without psychological enslavement to results. Picture Seneca investing enormous effort in his business ventures, political relationships, and literary works, while simultaneously holding all of these achievements lightly, knowing that external circumstances could change everything overnight. Marcus Aurelius faced the ultimate test of letting go when his beloved son, Commodus, whom he had carefully prepared to inherit the empire, turned out to be exactly the kind of ruler Marcus had spent his life trying not to become. Imagine the heartbreak of watching your life's work potentially undone by someone you loved deeply. Yet Marcus continued to fulfill his duties without becoming bitter or abandoning his principles. His journals from this period reveal someone practicing radical acceptance while maintaining active engagement with his responsibilities. The historical context makes this teaching especially poignant. Ancient life was genuinely precarious in ways that forced people to develop psychological flexibility around loss. Infant mortality was high. Political fortunes changed rapidly. Natural disasters could destroy years of work in hours. And even the wealthiest citizens could find themselves exiled or executed based on imperial whims. The Stoics developed letting go practices not as philosophical luxuries, but as essential survival skills for maintaining sanity in an unpredictable world. Here's the quirky detail that makes ancient attachment theory surprisingly modern. The Stoics distinguished between preferred indifference and true goods. They preferred health to sickness, wealth to poverty, and success to failure. But they didn't base their happiness on obtaining these preferences. This nuanced approach allowed them to work hard for positive outcomes while remaining psychologically flexible when those outcomes didn't materialize. It's like being a passionate sports fan who genuinely wants your team to win, but doesn't let their performance determine your mood for the entire week. The practical application of letting go starts with identifying what you're currently gripping too tightly. Maybe it's the need for a specific person to apologize for hurting you. Maybe it's attachment to a particular career outcome or relationship status. Maybe it's the desire for your adult children to make choices you approve of, or for your aging parents to accept help gracefully. The Stoic approach isn't to stop caring about these things. It's to care about them without being enslaved by them. The modern workplace provides endless opportunities for practicing strategic detachment. You can invest fully in your projects while accepting that budget cuts, management changes, or market conditions might derail your efforts. You can work diligently for promotions while understanding that factors beyond your control, office politics, economic downturns, or simply bad timing might affect outcomes. This doesn't make you passive or uncommitted. It makes you more effective because you're not wasting energy on stress about things you can't influence. Historians still argue whether Stoic detachment represents emotional maturity or a form of defensive withdrawal from life's intensity, but the evidence suggests it's actually a prerequisite for deeper engagement. When you're not constantly worried about protecting what you have or obtaining what you want, you can be more present to what's actually happening right now. When you're not attached to specific outcomes, you can be more creative in your approach to challenges and more open to opportunities you hadn't considered. The relationship applications of letting go are particularly transformative. You can love someone deeply while accepting that you can't control their choices, fix their problems, or make them love you back in exactly the way you want. You can be a devoted parent while understanding that your children will make their own mistakes and follow their own paths. You can be a loyal friend while recognizing that not all friendships are meant to last forever, and that's okay. The grief process becomes more manageable when you understand the difference between honoring loss and clinging to what's gone. You can miss someone who died while accepting that passing is part of life. You can feel sad about a relationship that ended while understanding that some connections serve their purpose and then naturally conclude. You can grieve missed opportunities while remaining open to new possibilities that you couldn't have imagined while focused on what didn't work out. The financial stress that keeps so many people awake responds beautifully to strategic detachment. You can work hard to build wealth while understanding that economic forces beyond your control might affect your investments. You can save diligently for retirement while accepting that you can't predict exactly what your future needs will be. You can be responsible with money without making your net worth the measure of your self-worth. The perfectionism that paralyzes so many people dissolves when you practice letting go of the need for flawless outcomes. You can do excellent work while accepting that mistakes are inevitable and often valuable. You can strive for high standards while understanding that good enough is often actually good enough. You can care about quality while releasing the stress that comes from trying to control every variable that might affect results. The evening practice of letting go involves identifying one thing you've been gripping too tightly and consciously relaxing your hold on it. Maybe it's resentment towards someone who hurt you, stress about a situation you can't control, or attachment to a specific outcome that may or may not happen. The practice isn't about not caring. It's about caring without suffering, engaging without attachment, and loving without possessiveness. The paradox of letting go is that it often brings you closer to what you actually want. When you stop desperately trying to control other people's behavior, your relationships often improve. When you stop worriedly monitoring your investments, you make better financial decisions. When you stop clinging to specific career outcomes, you become more creative and adaptable in pursuing your goals. Letting go creates space for new possibilities that couldn't emerge while you were tightly gripping old patterns. Tonight, as you consider what you might be holding onto too tightly, whether it's past hurts, future worries, or present frustrations, remember that the Stoics discovered something counterintuitive. The tighter you grip, the less control you actually have. True power comes from engaging fully while holding outcomes lightly, from caring deeply while accepting what you cannot change, and from loving completely while understanding that everything is temporary. The most liberating realization about letting go is that it doesn't mean giving up. It means freeing yourself to respond more skillfully to whatever actually happens, rather than exhausting yourself trying to force reality to match your preferences. You can still have goals, standards, and deep commitments. You just don't have to carry the impossible burden of controlling outcomes that were never really up to you in the first place. You're lying there, wondering why life has to be so difficult, why good people suffer while others seem to coast through without consequences, why your carefully laid plans keep getting derailed by circumstances beyond your control. The voice in your head is asking that ancient question that has echoed through human consciousness for millennia. Why me? Why this? Why now? This is where the Stoics offer their most profound reframe. What if your obstacles aren't blocking your path, but actually are your path? And what if the very difficulties that feel like punishments are actually the raw material for becoming who you're meant to be? Marcus Aurelius captured this insight in one of his most famous observations. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. He wasn't writing this from a comfortable philosophical study, but from a military tent on the Germanic frontier, dealing with plague, rebellion, and the constant pressure of decisions that affected millions of lives. Every obstacle he faced, from barbarian invasions to political conspiracies to his own physical ailments, became an opportunity to practice virtue, develop wisdom, and demonstrate the principles he believed in. The historical context makes this teaching especially powerful. Ancient life was genuinely harsh in ways that modern people struggle to comprehend. The Antonine Plague that Marcus Aurelius dealt with killed an estimated 5 million people across the Roman Empire. Seneca lived through political upheavals that could result in exile or execution based on imperial whims. Epictetus experienced slavery and physical disability. These weren't abstract philosophical problems. They were lived realities that required practical wisdom for psychological survival. Here's the quirky detail that makes this perspective surprisingly practical. The Stoics borrowed this insight from metallurgy and athletics. They observed that metals become stronger when subjected to heat and pressure, that athletes develop strength by working against resistance, and that trees grow deeper roots when exposed to strong winds. They applied this natural principle to human development, understanding that character is forged through challenge rather than comfort, and that the very difficulties we try to avoid are often exactly what we need for growth. The modern application starts with a fundamental shift in how you interpret setbacks, failures, and unexpected challenges. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you can ask, "How is this happening for me?" Instead of seeing obstacles as evidence that life is unfair or that you're unlucky, you can view them as customized training programs designed to develop exactly the strengths you need for your unique path through life. The career setbacks that feel devastating often redirect you toward opportunities you never would have discovered otherwise. The relationship that ended painfully teaches you something about love, boundaries, or your own patterns that you couldn't have learned any other way. The health scare that terrifies you might motivate lifestyle changes that add years to your life. The financial crisis that seems worst-case scenario could force you to develop resourcefulness and resilience that serve you for decades. Historians still argue whether this perspective represents genuine wisdom or a form of psychological defense mechanism that helps people cope with unavoidable suffering. But the practical results speak for themselves. People who can find meaning in their difficulties demonstrate better mental health outcomes, greater resilience to future challenges, and more satisfaction with their lives overall than those who see themselves primarily as victims of circumstances. The key insight is that meaning isn't something you find in suffering. It's something you create through your response to suffering. The same experience that breaks one person can strengthen another, not because of differences in the external circumstances, but because of differences in interpretation and response. The Stoics understood that you always have the power to choose what story you tell yourself about what happens to you, and that choice determines whether difficulties become sources of wisdom or sources of ongoing resentment. The parenting challenges that exhaust and frustrate you are simultaneously developing patience, creativity, and unconditional love in ways that no other experience could. The difficult boss who makes your work life miserable is also teaching you about leadership, communication, and professional boundaries. The aging parents who require increasing care are providing opportunities to practice compassion, acceptance, and the kind of love that gives without expecting anything in return. The physical limitations that come with aging, injury, or chronic illness force you to develop inner resources that you might never have discovered if life had remained physically easy. The financial pressures that create stress also motivate resourcefulness, planning, and appreciation for simple pleasures that wealthy people often take for granted. The social awkwardness that makes relationships challenging pushes you to develop authenticity, empathy, and the kind of genuine connection that transcends surface-level social skills. The evening practice of finding meaning in suffering involves reviewing your current challenges through the lens of growth rather than victimhood. What strengths are your difficulties developing? What wisdom are your mistakes teaching? What compassion are your losses creating? How are your obstacles preparing you for future opportunities that you can't yet imagine? This isn't about pretending that painful experiences feel good. It's about recognizing that they're contributing to your development in ways that comfort never could. The spiritual dimension of this teaching doesn't require religious belief. It just requires recognizing that your individual story is part of a larger process of growth and development that extends beyond your personal preferences and timeline. The same forces that create stars through gravitational collapse and forge diamonds through geological pressure are also creating whatever wisdom, strength, and compassion you're developing through your unique combination of challenges and opportunities. The community aspect of finding meaning in suffering connects you with others who have faced similar difficulties. Your struggles with addiction, melancholy, loss, or trauma become sources of understanding and support for others walking similar paths. Your professional failures become wisdom you can share with younger colleagues. Your relationship mistakes become insights you can offer to friends facing similar challenges. Your pain becomes a bridge to deeper connection with fellow humans who understand what it means to suffer and keep going anyway. The paradox of obstacle as path is that the very experiences you would choose to avoid often turn out to be the most transformative. The job you lost led to the career you love. The relationship that broke your heart taught you how to love more wisely. The illness that scared you motivated changes that improved your overall health. The financial crisis that felt devastating forced you to discover strengths and resources you didn't know you possessed. Tonight, as you consider whatever obstacles currently feel overwhelming in your life, remember that Marcus Aurelius faced challenges that make your current difficulties look manageable. Yet he found ways to transform every setback into an opportunity for practicing virtue. Your obstacles aren't punishments, they're curriculum. Your difficulties aren't evidence of bad luck, they're raw material for wisdom. Your suffering isn't meaningless, it's the price of admission to the kind of depth, compassion, and strength that can only be developed through experience. The most profound realization about finding meaning in suffering is that it transforms you from a victim of circumstances into a participant in your own development. You can't always choose what happens to you, but you can always choose what you make of what happens to you. That choice, repeated daily in small moments and major crises, determines not just how you feel about your life, but who you become through living it. You're lying there at 1:15 a.m., staring at the ceiling and wondering what the point of it all is. The daily grind, the endless responsibilities, the cycle of working and sleeping and working again. Your mind drifts between existential questions about whether anything you do really matters and practical concerns about whether you're wasting your limited time on earth pursuing the wrong things. This is where the Stoics offer their most essential teaching. Purpose isn't something you find lying around waiting to be discovered. It's something you create through the conscious alignment of your daily actions with your deepest values, transforming ordinary moments into expressions of what you believe matters most. Marcus Aurelius grappled with this question while managing an empire that spanned 3 continents, despite having access to every pleasure and privilege imaginable. His personal writings reveal someone constantly examining whether his actions served a purpose larger than personal gratification. In the morning, when thou risest unwillingly, let this thought be present. I am rising to the work of a human being, he reminded himself, not because imperial duties were inherently meaningful, but because he chose to approach them as opportunities to serve the common good. The historical context reveals something crucial about purpose. It's not about finding the perfect career or life mission. It's about bringing intentionality to whatever circumstances you find yourself in. Seneca found purpose while navigating the treacherous politics of Nero's court, using his position to moderate imperial excesses and protect innocent people when possible. Epictetus discovered meaning while enslaved, teaching fellow slaves how to maintain their dignity and inner freedom despite external oppression. None of them had ideal circumstances, but all of them created purposeful lives through conscious choice about how to respond to their situations. Here's the quirky detail that makes ancient purpose seeking surprisingly relevant to modern life. The Stoics understood that meaning comes from the process of living according to your values rather than from achieving specific outcomes. They focused on what they called the discipline of action, ensuring that your daily choices reflected your deeper commitments, regardless of whether those choices led to external success or recognition. This approach makes purpose accessible to everyone, not just those with prestigious careers or dramatic life missions. The modern search for purpose often gets derailed by the assumption that meaningful work must be obviously important, socially recognized, or personally fulfilling in obvious ways. But the Stoic approach suggests that any work can become purposeful when approached with the right intention. The teacher who shows up with patience and care for difficult students is serving a purpose. The parent who maintains consistency and love through the chaos of family life is fulfilling a mission. The friend who listens without judgment and offers support without expecting reciprocation is contributing to human flourishing in ways that matter deeply, even if they never make headlines. The relationship between mortality and purpose was central to Stoic thinking. They understood that life's brevity doesn't make it meaningless. It makes conscious choice about how to spend your time more urgent and important. When you remember that you have a limited number of days, conversations, and opportunities to make a positive difference, even small actions take on greater significance. The smile you offer to a stressed cashier, the patience you show to an elderly driver, the encouragement you give to a struggling colleague. These moments matter because time is finite and kindness is always needed. Historians still argue whether Stoic emphasis on virtue and duty represents genuine purpose or a form of moral obligation that constrains individual freedom. But the evidence suggests that living according to clear values actually increases rather than decreases personal satisfaction. When your actions align with your deeper beliefs about what matters, you experience the kind of integrity that makes daily life feel coherent and meaningful rather than random and chaotic. The practical application of purposeful living starts with identifying your core values, not what you think you should value or what others expect you to value, but what actually matters to you. When you strip away social expectations and external pressures, maybe it's creativity, justice, compassion, learning, beauty, or connection. Once you're clear about your values, you can look for ways to express them through your existing responsibilities, rather than waiting for perfect circumstances or ideal opportunities. The work that pays your bills can become purposeful when you approach it as an opportunity to practice excellence, serve others, or develop skills that contribute to your growth. The relationships that challenge you can become meaningful when you see them as chances to practice patience, forgiveness, and unconditional love. The daily routines that feel mundane can become significant when you understand them as the foundation that supports everything else you want to accomplish. The evening reflection on purpose involves examining how your day's actions reflected your deeper values. Did you treat people with the kindness you believe in? Did you approach your work with the excellence you aspire to? Did you make choices that moved you toward becoming the person you want to be? Or did you just react to immediate pressures and demands? This isn't about judging yourself harshly. It's about gentle course correction that helps you live more intentionally. The community dimension of purpose recognizes that individual meaning is often found through contribution to something larger than yourself. This doesn't require grand gestures or dramatic sacrifices. It can be as simple as being a reliable friend, a supportive family member, or a positive presence in your workplace. The Stoics understood that humans are social creatures and that personal flourishing is connected to the well-being of the communities we're part of. The legacy aspect of purposeful living isn't about being remembered after you die. It's about the ripple effects of your daily choices on the people whose lives intersect with yours. The patience you model for your children teaches them how to handle frustration. The integrity you demonstrate at work influences colleagues' understanding of what's possible. The compassion you show to struggling friends gives them hope during difficult times. Your purpose is being fulfilled through countless small interactions that you might not even recognize as significant. The creative expression of purpose doesn't require artistic talent or professional recognition. It requires bringing your unique perspective and gifts to whatever you're doing. The accountant who approaches numbers with precision and care is creating order from chaos. The nurse who treats patients with dignity and compassion is creating healing environments. The parent who maintains patience and humor through family challenges is creating emotional safety for their children. Tonight, as you consider what gives your life meaning and whether you're living according to your deepest values, remember that the Stoics found purpose not through perfect circumstances, but through conscious choice about how to respond to imperfect circumstances. Your purpose isn't waiting to be discovered in some future career or life situation. It's available right now through how you choose to approach tomorrow's ordinary moments. The most liberating realization about purpose is that it doesn't require external validation or obvious success. When your actions align with your values, when you treat people with the respect and kindness you believe in, when you approach your responsibilities with integrity and care, you're living purposefully, regardless of whether anyone notices or appreciates your efforts. The meaning is in the living itself, in the conscious choice to be who you want to be, regardless of circumstances. You're settling into the quiet darkness of your bedroom, feeling the weight of everything we've explored together tonight. The wisdom of ancient philosophers who face challenges remarkably similar to your own. The practical tools for transforming stress into acceptance, and the gradual recognition that peace isn't something you find, but something you create through daily practice. As we reach the end of our journey through Stoic wisdom, you're not graduating from some philosophical program. You're beginning a lifelong practice of living more intentionally, responding more wisely, and finding tranquility in the midst of life's beautiful chaos. The integration of Stoic principles into modern life isn't about becoming perfect or eliminating all sources of stress and uncertainty. It's about developing the internal resources that allow you to navigate whatever comes with greater equanimity, wisdom, and grace. Think of tonight's exploration as planting seeds that will grow slowly over time through consistent practice, gentle self-correction, and the patient cultivation of habits that align your daily actions with your deeper values. The morning routine we discussed, those few minutes of philosophical reflection before diving into the day's demands, becomes your daily reset button, a way of remembering what you can and can't control before the world starts making its demands on your attention. The dichotomy of control transforms from an abstract concept into a practical filter for deciding where to invest your mental energy. The evening reflection evolves from an occasional practice into a natural way of processing experiences and preparing your mind for restorative sleep. The historical figures we've met tonight, Marcus Aurelius, with his worried temperament and overwhelming responsibilities, Seneca with his wealth and political pressures, Epictetus with his physical limitations and experience of powerlessness, become companions rather than distant philosophical authorities. They faced human challenges with human limitations and discovered that wisdom isn't about having all the answers, but about asking better questions and responding to life's difficulties with increasing skill and compassion. The practical applications we've explored, from managing social media stress to handling difficult relationships, from building resilience to finding meaning in suffering, provide a toolkit that grows more useful with practice. Each technique becomes more natural through repetition. Each insight deepens through application, and each challenge becomes an opportunity to practice what you've learned rather than evidence that the philosophy doesn't work. Historians still debate whether Stoicism represents the pinnacle of practical wisdom or simply one approach among many for living well. But the evidence of its effectiveness lies not in academic arguments, but in the lived experience of people who have applied these principles to their own challenges and found greater peace, purpose, and resilience as a result. The philosophy has survived for over 2,000 years, not because it's theoretically perfect, but because it works in practice for real people dealing with real problems. The community aspect of Stoic practice connects you with a tradition that spans centuries and continents, linking you with everyone who has ever struggled to live wisely in difficult circumstances. You're part of a conversation that includes Roman emperors and enslaved philosophers, medieval scholars, and modern psychologists, all united by the recognition that external circumstances don't determine internal peace, and that wisdom is available to anyone willing to practice it consistently. The quirky detail that makes this ancient wisdom especially relevant to contemporary life is how perfectly it addresses the specific anxieties of our digital age. The comparison culture of social media, the information overload of 24-hour news cycles, the career uncertainty of rapidly changing economic conditions, and the relationship challenges of maintaining authentic connection in an increasingly virtual world. The Stoics couldn't have anticipated smartphones and social media, but they understood the human tendencies that these technologies exploit. The integration process involves gradually incorporating Stoic practices into your existing routines rather than trying to revolutionize your entire approach to life overnight. Start with one small practice, maybe the morning intention setting we discussed, or the evening gratitude reflection, or simply pausing to ask, is this something I can control? When you notice yourself getting worried about outcomes beyond your influence, the resistance you'll encounter, both internal resistance to changing established patterns and external resistance from people who prefer the familiar version of you, is normal and expected. Change is uncomfortable, even when it's positive, and the people around you might initially be suspicious of your increased equanimity or your reduced reactivity to drama and chaos. This resistance isn't evidence that you're doing something wrong. It's evidence that you're doing something different. And different always feels uncertain at first. The long-term vision of Stoic practice isn't about becoming emotionally invulnerable or achieving perfect wisdom. It's about gradually developing the kind of inner stability that allows you to engage fully with life while remaining centered regardless of external circumstances. You'll still feel emotions, face challenges, and make mistakes, but you'll do so with increasing awareness, acceptance, and skill. Tonight, as you prepare to carry these insights into your daily life, remember that every moment offers a new opportunity to practice what you've learned. Tomorrow's traffic jam becomes a chance to practice patience. Next week's difficult conversation becomes an opportunity to respond with wisdom rather than reactivity. Next month's unexpected challenge becomes raw material for building resilience and finding meaning in difficulty. The most beautiful aspect of Stoic philosophy is how it transforms ordinary moments into opportunities for growth and wisdom. Washing dishes becomes a mindfulness practice. Commuting becomes time for reflection. Dealing with difficult people becomes training in compassion and boundary setting. Every experience becomes part of your ongoing education in how to live well. As you close your eyes tonight, let your breathing slow and deepen, feeling your body settle into the comfort of your bed, while your mind settles into the peace that comes from knowing you have practical tools for handling whatever tomorrow brings. The ancient wisdom we've explored together isn't just intellectual knowledge. It's a living tradition that continues through your willingness to apply these insights to your own life, to share them with others who might benefit, and to contribute your own discoveries to the ongoing human conversation about how to live wisely in challenging times. The Stoics understood something that remains true today. Peace isn't the absence of problems. It's the presence of wisdom in how you respond to problems. Happiness isn't the result of perfect circumstances. It's the result of conscious choice about how to approach imperfect circumstances. Freedom isn't the ability to control what happens to you. It's the recognition that you always have the power to choose your response to what happens to you. Sweet dreams, fellow traveler on the path of wisdom. May you wake tomorrow with renewed appreciation for the tools you now possess, the strength you've always had, and the peace that comes from knowing that whatever challenges arise, you have everything you need to meet them with grace, courage, and the quiet confidence that comes from living according to your deepest values. The journey through ancient wisdom for modern stress draws to a gentle close as your breathing deepens and your mind finally releases its grip on the day's concerns. You've spent these hours in the company of philosophers who understood that true peace comes not from eliminating life's challenges, but from transforming your relationship with them. The Stoic tools you've explored tonight, the dichotomy of control, negative visualization, morning reflections, evening reviews, and the cultivation of virtue, aren't just intellectual concepts, but practical skills that become more natural with practice. As sleep approaches, let yourself feel grateful for this moment of stillness, for the comfort of your bed, for the privilege of learning from wisdom, traditions that have helped countless people find peace in turbulent times. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges and opportunities, but you now have a philosophical framework for meeting them with greater equanimity and wisdom. The ancient Stoics would remind you that this isn't the end of your philosophical journey, but the beginning of a lifelong practice of living more intentionally. Each day offers new opportunities to apply what you've learned, to grow in wisdom and compassion, and to contribute to the well-being of the communities you're part of. You're now connected to a tradition that spans millennia, united with all who have sought to live well despite life's inherent difficulties. Rest now in the knowledge that you have everything you need to handle whatever comes, that your worth isn't determined by external circumstances, and that peace is always available through the conscious choice to focus on what you can control while accepting what you cannot. Let these insights settle into your unconscious mind as you drift into restorative sleep, trusting that tomorrow you'll wake with renewed clarity about what truly matters and how to live according to your deepest values. The wisdom of the ages whispers you towards sleep, reminding you that you're exactly where you need to be, learning exactly what you need to learn, and becoming exactly who you're meant to become through the patient practice of living wisely, one conscious choice at a time.